Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal. See playlist for other chapters and novels. Join now our Telegram channel now and enjoy exclusive early access. t.me/blood_immortal_official. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 401, Creepy, Creepy. The pressure pressing down on his shoulders came as a heavy burden. There was no need for him to say it out loud. Right now, the body of the Goblin King was emitting genuine murderous intent. SSSSH. The goblin's face was revealed from under the removed mask. The king of hundreds of millions of goblins. The huge club held in his hand was aimed at you-one with great force. Ha! I thought about adapting to my body with my newly acquired stats and training with the Horse King. But this happened before that. Well, whatever. Strength entered Yuan's legs, which were standing on the ground. If something really happened to me. Crack. As he stepped forward, the ground split open. Strength 148. And stamina, which was more than enough to support that strength, reaching 151. It was difficult to control his strength, but his body was overflowing with strength. Other than that, it wouldn't hurt to check. A force that would make even the Horse King and Goblin King light up their eyes. The two of them wouldn't react like this just because his strength and stamina stats had increased. Especially the Goblin King, who was the creator of the physical strengthening ritual, would have known better than anyone that Yuan's stats would increase by leaps and bounds. That meant one thing. It means that there was another unexpected change in him. Creak, creak. The muscles around Yuan's body began to wriggle slightly. Magic power spread throughout his body, and the magic power that spread gave strength to his whole body. If you say so, the power of the giant dwells throughout your body. His opponent was the Goblin King. He was an opponent who had no shortage of adaptability to his body. I won't just sit back and watch. Screech, rumble. Wan Jiamjung reveals the truth. Eyes of Prophecy reveals the future. Sensory territory is activated. A red aura covered the golden eyes. Wan Jiamjung floated above the eyes of Prophecy. Numerous images of the Goblin King were reflected in front of his eyes. And in that moment, crash, in front of Yuan's eyes, he saw himself being hit by the Goblin King's club. Boom, he ducked and hurriedly avoided the club. In an instant, the future he saw changed and a different image was reflected. The crumbling ground. Bang, the Goblin King's fist crushed the ground where Yuan was standing. Heavenly Steps is activated. Movement speed increases. Pop, Yuan jumped up. Yuan's fist, which had passed over the Goblin King's head, stretched out towards the Goblin King's side. Bam, the Goblin King was pushed back and flew away. Creak, screech, the Goblin King slammed one leg into the ground and supported his flying body. A clash that took place in an instant. Li Mothal, who was watching the scene from afar on a bamboo tree, opened his mouth. The Goblin King was pushed back. It was hard to believe even with his own eyes. He hadn't used any special techniques, but Yuan naturally dodged the Goblin King's attack and counterattacked like flowing water. Yuan was just as surprised. Thud, Yuan looked at his fist, which was embedded in the Goblin King's side. Using the eyes of prophecy became much more natural. It was only about 1 second, but seeing the future was still a huge advantage. In the past, Yuan's fist wouldn't have hit the Goblin King's body properly. It works now. Sufficient strength and stamina. The burden of using the eyes of prophecy has also been greatly reduced. It was still difficult to go head-to-head with the Goblin King and fight a battle of strength against strength, but if he used the eyes of prophecy, he had a good chance of winning. Above all else, this isn't a martial arts match in the first place. Screech. A red sword was drawn from Yuan's inventory. The sword of Kusanagi. In order to pierce the Goblin King's thick skin, a sword with sufficient strength and lethality was needed. Rumble. The sound of thunder erupted from the Kusanagi. Crackle, crackle. The Goblin King walked towards the Kusanagi, which was wrapped in lightning. You know how to fight quite well. The Goblin King, whose face had completely changed into that of a goblin. He reached out his fist towards Yuan once again. Bang. Inside the vast bamboo forest. Quirang, Quawong. Inside it, lightning bolts continuously exploded, and flames rose. Jioyoyo, kugu, kugu. The ground shook as if an earthquake had occurred. The bamboo trees that had stood firm even in typhoons were either broken or knocked sideways. Lee Maidel raised one hand to protect his head from the electricity that was bouncing off from afar. Chijit, chi. The concentration of electricity that was transmitted through his arm was not ordinary. Lee Maidel himself was fine with this level of electricity because he had also received initiation. However, if he were to get caught in that, it would be a different story. It was so dazzling that it was hard to see properly. Amidst it, a hot sensation gradually permeated through his arm and spread to his face. Jajang, Yuan's sword clashed with the Goblin King's club. The sword was pushed back. Soon after, the Goblin King's fist was embedded in Yuan's torso. Jajang, Yuan's body flew backward. From the Goblin King's perspective, who was fighting up close, it was mind-boggling. Yuan, who had been using his foresight to continuously dodge like a loach, was suddenly caught in his hand. However, it was visible in Lee Maidel's eyes, who was watching from afar. Wung, wung wung wung. Thousands of mana pods filled the sky. The Goblin King realized it when it was already too late. Quao, mana pods with lightning attributes poured down like a shower. They did not have the sharp form of lightning bolts, but each one was more powerful than what even the top rankers could shoot out with all their might. Was he setting a trap? He intentionally made it seem as if he could be caught, gradually distracting the Goblin King's attention. He allowed the punch at the last moment and poured out the mana pods that he had prepared all at once. The operation of the fight was dazzlingly smooth. The process of digging a trap and luring the opponent into it was flawless. Both his ability to create mana pods and his magic power that can handle such mana pods are top-notch. Lee Maidel was a ranker. Although his ranking was measured low because he had stopped his activities and stayed in the Goblin Nation, he had confidence. He was confident that he could become a high ranker within the top 100 at least when he finished all of his promises with the Goblin King and went outside. However, when he compared himself to Yuan, who was right before his eyes, he felt dizzy. However, but still, Paget, Pajigigigi, amidst the waves of electricity that stormed in due to the thousands of mana pods. Lee Maidel found the Goblin King standing in the middle of it. You're no match for the king. The Goblin King touched his throbbing neck and glared at Yuan through the dimming electricity. This was quite refreshing. Refreshing. It was not something that one should say after getting hit by that enormous amount of mana pods. Your senses are good. Was it all to set a trap? It was a blow that he had prepared quite a lot for. Yuan looked at the Goblin King with a tired face. From the outside, the Goblin King seemed fine. Eventually, this kind of damage would accumulate and collapse, but it would take too much time and effort to do so. He might get tired first before that happens. Am I not supposed to fight like this, nibbling away at him? He knew how to deal with such a sturdy guy. Heracles and Satan were the same. Against opponents with strong stamina, a powerful blow was necessary. Just like Nier. However, I don't have time to throw it. The problem was that he didn't have time to throw the spear. Above all, it took a long time for Nier to activate. Susanoo would need to buy him time to create such an opening, but it would be impossible against the Goblin King. Then there was only one way. Do I have to enter that guy's range? All he had to do was create a sharper thunderbolt and deliver a powerful blow from within the Goblin King's reach. Jabug. Yuan's toes headed toward the Goblin King. That was the first change in this fight. Pajigigigi. A huge thunderbolt was created in Yuan's hand. The Goblin King smiled because he could clearly see what he was thinking. A head-on match. He held his spear with Kusanagi inserted and closed the distance. It was obvious what that meant. He must have realized by now. The fact that it was meaningless to keep accumulating damage from a distance. Good. Thud, thud. The electricity that had poured onto the ground had not yet dissipated. The distance between Wu Wan and the Goblin King narrowed. I'm glad that's the case. 20 or so steps. Wu Wan felt an inexplicable ominous feeling at the expression of the Goblin King, who began to laugh from a distance where his bat could not reach. I think I've figured out how to destroy that eye of yours. Swish, swish. Wu Wan saw letters crawling along the ground and into his body through his eyes. The letters of the goblins were a sign of witchcraft. The moment he was caught up in those letters, it was no different from being caught in a spell. But, roar, the densely written letters spread out with Wu Wan and the Goblin King at the center, forming a narrow space. It happened in the blink of an eye. He looked up and saw that the sky was also covered with letters containing witchcraft. When did he? No matter how powerful the Goblin King was, he could not use witchcraft with just his will without any gestures or movements. It takes time to use witchcraft. And there was only one time when he had enough time. I wondered why you didn't just run away when you were fine, but were you preparing this while hiding? With those eyes, you can only see about 2 seconds at a time. That meant he was planning for a time further in the future, out of Wu Won's sight. Just in case, Wu Won fired a thunderbolt at the wall created by the Goblin King. Rumble, clang, Wu Won's body staggered from the recoil that bounced off the wall. The wall did not budge. It seemed that it would not be broken by attacking it once or twice. It's useless. Thud, the Goblin King took another step towards Wu Won. Now you can't run around. I see. There was no need to panic. Wu Won had planned to change the scope of the fight to infighting anyway. So what changes is, whoosh, suddenly, a fist stretched out before his eyes. It was not difficult to avoid it. The problem was what came next. Whoosh, boom, bang, thud, fists and bats stretched out without rest. It seemed that the idea of landing a critical blow in close combat was too much pride. Even though it's infighting, I came in too deep. Phew, I need to back away to a distance where I can use my spear, not my fists. Click, Wu Won's feet stopped. Right after that, he saw what would happen if he took one more step back. Damn it, blocked by the wall, he would be hit by the Goblin King's bat. That was the result of taking a step back. Just because you know doesn't mean you can avoid everything. Bang, quote exclamation mark quote. Wu Won's eyes widened as his fist was embedded in his torso. The shock was directly transmitted to his internal organs, and he felt like he was going to vomit. Especially when the space is narrow like this. Ah. Just because you know a tsunami is coming doesn't mean you can stop or avoid it. That's what the situation was like now. With the Goblin King's witchcraft blocking all sides, the Eye of Prophecy was not much help. In this narrow space, the Goblin King's attacks were not the kind that could be blocked or avoided just because he knew they were coming. There's no way, now that the way to distance himself was gone. There was only one way left. I'll fight in this distance. Bang, Wu Won spat out blood and clenched his fists. Running away from this situation would only make things worse. Now, he had no choice but to fight, trusting in his physically enhanced body through the technique. Creak, creak, mana from all over his body settled into his body and activated his muscles. His senses sharpened as he was cornered, and he spread his aura throughout his body, which had been strengthened by his high physical strength. And so began the transformation of the giant. The power of the giant dwells in your whole body. The giant and demon's flame at its peak dwells in your body. Beginning the reenactment of the Giant King. It was a little different from anything Wu Won had experienced before. Chapter 402. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The Goblin King, who was approaching. Against such a Goblin King, Wu Won raised his gigantification to the maximum. After all, gigantification was the most efficient skill in close combat, or rather, in a dogfight. However, swoosh, a red demonic figure appeared before his eyes. Wu Won's pupils dilated as he saw the blurry figure. Surtur, bang, in an instant, the Goblin King's body was pushed back by the fist that was thrust forward. The Goblin King was also surprised. But that was for a moment, as the Goblin King muttered, rubbing his stomach, which had been hit, with one hand as if it had come out. It's the beginning. That was when it felt like that. Right after the spell was finished. The feeling of an unknown power that Wu Won could feel. It felt as if there was someone else behind Wu Won. Swoosh, Wu Won looked at the red demonic figure floating before his eyes. It was much smaller in size, but it looked similar to someone Wu Won knew as it distorted and became clear again. It's Surtur. It was much smaller in size, and its shape was different from what he knew, but he could definitely feel it. This power definitely belonged to Surtur. Plus, even though it was a message that came in such a hurry, he heard it clearly. Giant and Demon's Flame. It was the same message he had heard when he gained Surtur's trait through the potion. Did Surtur's trait react to gigantification? It was plausible. In the first place, gigantification was a hidden piece that Hercules had acquired after slaughtering millions of giants. Of course, Wu Won had acquired the skill more easily through the tutorial, but because of that, the skill's effectiveness couldn't help but be qualitatively different. But Surtur, if it was the power extracted from the heart of a high ranker ranked 4th, who had reached the peak of the giants. It was possible to replace the share of those millions of giants. Boom, should I test it out? Thud, thud, the power surged through his body. As grand as the name, the recreation of the Giant King, Wu Won decided to trust gigantification once. Because in this narrow space right now, that was the only way to deal with the Goblin King. It seems the cleanup is almost done. The Goblin King began to approach again, seeing the foreign body in Yuan's eyes. He was pushed back, but that was only for a moment. The Goblin King, who had regained his posture and raised his bat, gave off an even more fearsome aura than before. Can I expect something real now? The Goblin King raised his bat. Swish! Yuan's sword flew toward the Goblin King's waist. Clang! Quote! Exclamation mark! Quote! Throb! Throb! The Goblin King's eyes widened as he blocked the sword. Unlike before, he felt pain in his hand. It was the second time he had been shocked to this extent in a battle of strength against strength. The first time was a few days ago, when he fought the Horse King. I think so. Clack! Clack! This time, it was Yuan. Ah! The Goblin King groaned and put strength into his hand. He had expected it, but it was truly a brute force. He shouldn't let his guard down. The Goblin King decided not to think of his opponent before him as a newbie ranker who had just become one. Is this what that guy, Hercules, that I heard about, was like? He had heard the stories. They said that he was a great guy who had earned the title of Giant Slayer, after slaughtering millions of giants and crossing the battlefield alone against an endless number of giants. That guy was one of the rankers he was quite interested in. The Goblin King was even more so because he was quite confident in his strength. But why? It seemed as if he could see the face of Hercules, whom he had only heard rumors about, on the face of Yuan before him. Bam! Boom! Clang! He blocked the sword with his bat, and his fist collided with a fist. Yuan's attacks seemed endless. The Goblin King's fingers, which had been blocking the sword and fist, wrote a word in the air. Thud! Yuan's sword, which was about to cut off the Goblin King's shoulder, fell down. Suddenly, the sword felt thousands, tens of thousands of times heavier. The weight of the sword changed instantaneously. It wasn't heavy enough to be unbearable, but it was enough of a change to lose posture for a moment. Bam! Quote! Exclamation mark! Quote! Yuan gritted his teeth at the heavy shock he felt in his stomach. He struggled to endure the shock as much as possible. At the same time, the Uranus in his hand emitted a blue light. Protection of the sea is possessed by the body. Protection of the sea is being destroyed. Crash! Both legs were firmly fixed to the ground. The Goblin King frowned as if he had hit something like an unmoving mountain. His fist had definitely connected. Yuan's body didn't take a single step back. Swish! Yuan's hand grabbed the Goblin King's wrist. Thick forearms like logs. In that position, which seemed difficult even to hold, Yuan clenched his wrist with brute force and flipped the Goblin King's body. Boom! Quang! As the Goblin King fell, the ground flipped over. It was a shock that would have blown away the entire bamboo forest around them if it hadn't been protected by witchcraft. Thick smoke rose. Yuan looked down at the Goblin King, who had been thrown into the ground by the Wan Jiamzheng, and looked down at his body. The protection of the sea is broken. A skill possessed by the heart of Uranus. The protection of the sea was automatically activated when a fatal attack was made on Yuan. Therefore, it was a skill with short stamina but strong defense. However, the Goblin King's fist broke through the protection of the sea in one blow. Of course, even so, it was only thanks to Yuan's body that he was able to withstand that fist. The Giant King's recreation has reached 70%. Thump, thump. He could feel the blood vessels in his muscles all over his body beating rapidly with his heartbeat. It was clear that it wasn't a power that he could use for a long time. If this is really Surtur's power. Surtur, the strongest giant of all time and Odin's longtime rival. And the leader of Muspelheim, who possesses the power of the demons. Even with the stats I have now, it's not enough. Hercules was also a ranker who was unmatched in strength. However, Surtur was an existence that was out of the norm from the beginning. If one were to look at just strength alone, Hercules might be superior, but the power he exuded from his size alone was enough to make even Hercules uncomfortable. On top of that, he possessed a huge flame that could cover all of Muspelheim in flames. Sometimes it's a shame, you know. One of the few high rankers who knew Surtur. Odin, who had thrust Gungnir directly into his heart, had expressed his regret several times. Surtur, I wish that guy was on our side. Indeed, if it were that guy, he would have been able to stop Shub-Niggurath a little bit. What kind of being would Surtur become if he gained divinity? That was Odin's long-standing interest. As the king of Muspelheim, he was the first to become the king of both giants and demons. He had the tenacity to withstand even Gungnir and the strength to rival Hercules long ago. That existence was Surtur. We should give up. It may be possible with someone else, but Surtur, that guy is impossible to rehabilitate. I know that too. That guy's problem isn't a specific incident or trigger, but his innate disposition. Still, there is another way. The heart of fire. No, something else. Hercules, who was talking, turned his head and looked at Emil. That ritual, at that time, Yuan, who had been there, thought it was absurd. But it was real. Maybe that guy's heart could be the ingredient for perfect gigantification. Of course, there was a condition for that. He had to finish Ragnarok before the time of the ritual and obtain Surtur's heart. It was quite a difficult task. Delaying the ritual was a problem, and causing an unprepared Ragnarok was also risky. But in the end, the reappear of the Giant King is complete. You have acquired the Giant King's flesh and heart. You have acquired the title, Giant King. Thump, thump. He could feel the muscles in his body expanding and hardening. The trait he had gained through Surtur's heart was just beginning. Gigantification evolves into perfect gigantification. You have acquired perfect gigantification. The skill that Hercules had mastered after slaughtering millions of giants. The duration of perfect gigantification is 3 minutes remaining. 259, 258, was it because of his proficiency, like Yi Jin? He felt like the burden on his body was quite a bit, and the duration was short. 3 minutes. It wasn't that long. Still, thud. Yuan looked at the Goblin King, who was slowly walking out of the ground. This much time should be enough. Perfect gigantification was done. Now, for these 3 minutes, the short distance gave Yuan a more advantageous high ground. Bam! Yuan's fist, which had jumped up, struck the Goblin King's head. Bang! The Goblin King's head turned to the side. In an instant, his vision disappeared, and his consciousness faded. But his fist went out reflexively. Boom! The Goblin King's fist grazed Yuan's head once again. There was no protection from the sea. Since it was an already awakened skill, it took quite a while to recover. But Yuan didn't get pushed back even after taking that punch. No, rather, crunch. As if he had been waiting for it, Yuan thrust his fist into the Goblin King's abdomen. Bang, bang, bang. Fists were exchanged. Yuan threw away the sword he was holding, and the Goblin King threw away his club. A fist fight. It was literally a dogfight. Bang. Screech. The Goblin King took a step back. His body shook as he was slowly overwhelmed by the force. He continued to make eye contact with Yuan, but at some point, Yuan stopped using Yi Jin as well. That meant, I'm being pushed back in a fistfight. It started after that unidentified power had awakened. The strength that had been similar little by little began to explode suddenly, and before he knew it, he was beginning to overwhelm him. He was the one who had led it to a fight of strength against strength. But now it was time to fold. If not with strength. Now there was only one option left. Slash, slash. Words were engraved in the void from the tip of the Goblin King's hand. As if not to watch, Yuan ran towards the Goblin King. There wasn't much time. The duration of perfect gigantification was only about 1 minute left. Yuan was in a position where he had to hurry and finish it. Bang! Yuan's fist struck the Goblin King's chest. Surely it would have been quite a blow. Crackle. But the Goblin King grabbed Yuan's arm and stretched it out. It was to use the ritual he had just created. Ritual means the power to call upon souls. Susu, Susu. Letters began to seep into Yuan's body. Using it as a medium, the Goblin King could directly see Yuan's soul, which was invisible. If you shake the soul, the body will naturally lose its strength. And that moment, crack, strength, a giant mouth opened towards the Goblin King. The Goblin King's pupils shook at the appearance of a completely different being than he had thought. What is this? Chapter 403. The soul meant the essence of that person. Usually, its existence was revealed after death. However, the Goblin King's sorcery made it possible to directly see the soul hidden in the thick and hard flesh. If you shake the soul once like that, the flesh will naturally collapse. However, clang, the Goblin King saw the existence he had never seen before in his life above the revealed Yuan's soul. A huge mouth and teeth. And a huge amorphous being with it. Roar! The Goblin King hurriedly let go of Yuan's arm and stepped back. Was it because he was far away? The monster that appeared before his eyes disappeared. What are you? The Goblin King asked, pointing at Yuan. What the hell is behind you? It wasn't Yuan's soul that was seen just now. A completely different being. It was protecting Yuan like a god in his body. Of course, Yuan couldn't see what the Goblin King saw. What do you mean, what is it? At that moment, one thought crossed Yuan's mind. It's about time. He seemed to know what the Goblin King saw. It seemed that Dana had taken action against the Goblin King who was trying to touch his soul. Although it is still in the form of an egg. Unlike before, the egg was hatching rapidly. Stop it now. Stop what all of a sudden. Bang. Yu-won turned around and hit the wall. Wang. The wall vibrated. The wall made of sorcery shook and cracked. And towards the crack that was created. Crack. Once again, Yu-won's fist hit. And, clang, the wall made of sorcery broke as it was. As one side collapsed, the power of sorcery weakened sharply, and the collapse continued in a chain. The wall created by the Goblin King. Immediately after it all disappeared. The duration of complete gigantification is over. Complete gigantification changes to gigantification. You can use complete gigantification after 24 hours. All 3 minutes given to Yu-won had passed. After the fight with the Goblin King, Yu-won went to a pavilion for a while and lay down. Is it because it's the first time I've used complete gigantification? Was it because it was the first time he had used the complete gigantification? The tower that you know is only a small part of it. For a moment, his body felt drained of all its strength, and fatigue washed over him. Phew. Lying on the pavilion, Yu-won raised his hand. Hey, bam. He tried to put strength in his hand, but it didn't have the same strength as before. It was because the complete gigantification was over. It's still too short, both the duration and the cooldown required for reuse. Both were still very disappointing. But that was okay, the duration and cooldown could be solved by improving his proficiency. There was only one thing to think about now. Quite no, very useful. That meant that the complete gigantification was that effective of a skill. Phew, he closed his eyes for a moment and opened them again, feeling his strength returning to his body. It seemed that his stamina had increased, and his recovery had improved as well. When he checked his kit, he saw that about 3 hours had passed. I'm not hurt anyway. It was a fierce fight, but he wasn't particularly hurt. Yu-won got up and left the pavilion. Should I really go now? Yu-won stopped by to say hello to the Goblin King. He wasn't badly hurt either. He had a few bruises on his body, but the Goblin King said that it was something that could be cured with just a sip of water. I still can't pay you properly. Just bring me 100 million points. You owe me a debt. That's so expensive. I should have charged you more, but I gave you a discount. Be grateful. Yu-won paid for the procedure right there. It was partly to say hello, but the main reason he had come to see the Goblin King was to pay for the procedure. Are you leaving now? Yes. Yu-won nodded and looked at the Goblin King as if asking if he had anything else to say. The fact that he had suddenly asked to fight, and the fact that he hadn't immediately ordered the execution. The Goblin King seemed to have something more to say. If you go all the way, as expected, do you think you'll win? The Goblin King asked with eyes that still held some speculation. It seemed that the unfinished fight was still on his mind. Unlike his first impression as a drunkard, the current Goblin King was closer to a warrior. Phew. Yu-won reached into his inventory. Such a large bottle of alcohol. Yu-won pulled out Dionysus, wine and replied. This place is a well. A well, a well, just as Wu-yun turned to walk out of his dwelling after greeting them like that. Are you calling me a frog in a well right now? Snap. The Goblin King's brow furrowed at the unexpected response. Judging from the bulging veins, it seemed like the unfinished fight might start again if he said one wrong word here. Right next to him, in fact, Li Mei-tal, who assisted the Goblin King, shook his head as he looked at Wu-yun. It was a gesture telling him to let it go. However, do you think the Horse King fought you with all his strength? Wu-yun didn't stop talking because of that. What do you mean by that? I don't think I can win against him. Wu-yun had grabbed the Horse King's hand just for a moment. Although he didn't know about the Horse King in the past, the current Horse King was ahead of Hercules in terms of sheer strength. Moreover, the Horse King, who had ascended to godhood by climbing the tower, had become several times stronger than before. No matter how many dozens of stats Wu-yun had gained through the operation, and no matter how he had mastered perfect gigantification, it was still impossible for him to defeat the Horse King. That bastard went easy on you, is that what you're saying? You understand well. Every single word you say is so cheeky. Snap, snap, veins appeared on the Goblin King's forehead. He looked like he was about to jump up and swing his club again at any moment. As Li Mei-tal watched the situation between Wu-yun and the Goblin King, who had taken a deep breath, asked. How many people do you think are stronger than me outside of here? It was a simple question. There probably wasn't anyone in the tower who was as knowledgeable about the information on the high rankers as Wu-yun. Except for the Rankings Management Bureau, that is. Including Odin, whom you know, at least 6. At most, 10. At least 6, huh. The Goblin King nodded as he mulled over Wu Yun's words. The world has changed a lot. A frog in a well. Wu Yun's words reached him anew. Unlike in the old days, when he used to look down on rankers like they were bugs, the level of the current rankers seemed to have risen considerably. This alcohol is a parting gift. It seems like you've quit drinking, but drink it as if it's your last. I'll receive it with gratitude. Swoosh. The Goblin King reached out and took the bottle of Dionysus, alcohol. As Yu-Wan turned around and was about to walk out of his residence after greeting him. Among the 10 you mentioned, the Goblin King asked one last question. Will you be one of them? I've already taken one step back. It's still 50-50. A blunt answer. The Goblin King watched Yu-Wan's back as if he had nothing more to say and muttered in a lingering voice. One step back, huh? At the top of the stairs was sunlight that he hadn't seen in a long time. When he came out of the alley and into the middle of downtown, he saw a huge crowd. People who were not goblins. The world had completely changed, even though he had only climbed one flight of stairs. It's still the same. The world was the same even after Shub-Niggurath appeared. For a while, it became a big issue, and large guilds, including Asgard, moved, but for ordinary rankers and tower dwellers, it was a story from another world. Yu-Wan headed towards his intended destination. No one paid much attention to Yu-Wan because he walked among the large crowd. However, hey, have you seen this? A ranker passing by Yu-Wan pointed to the kit he was holding. The ranking. What happened all of a sudden in a few days? For rankers, ranking was the most interesting subject of interest. Ranking was nothing more than a number that comprehensived various factors such as rankers' force, power, and influence. Being high in the rankings meant that you were doing well. That's why the high rankers in the ranking circle were like stars to the lower level players and the rankers who gave up on ranking up. Kim Yu-Wan's ranking what the hell? The ranker looking at the kid like that turned his head at the sound. In the eyes of the two rankers who were talking like that. What? Yu-Wan, who was looking at the kid with the two rankers, was reflected. Sorry, two people making eye contact. Pot. It was a fast speed befitting a ranker. I don't know what I'm sorry for, but it seemed like I was really scared. Thud. The spot where the two disappeared. The kit the ranker was holding fell to the floor. Who's going to pick it up? Out of curiosity, what he was peeking at was actually himself. Yu-Wan picked up the kit that had fallen to the ground and checked the rankings that he had been looking at a moment ago. He couldn't believe it even though he saw it with his own eyes. Kim Yu-Wan, 11th. His ranking had risen much higher than before. 11th place. To be exact, Yu-Wan's ranking was 28th before he went to the Goblin Country. The low ranking was because the fight with Satan had not been properly observed. But this time, the ranking seemed to have been properly evaluated to match Yu-Wan's abilities. This was after he had visited the Goblin Country, and his stats had been properly reflected. Did they observe the fight with the Goblin King? If so, it made sense. Even if the Goblin King came out of the Goblin Country right now, his power would probably be among the top 10 in this tower. If they had observed the fight with such a Goblin King, it wouldn't be strange to be ranked like this. No, in fact, it was rather measured low. Unlike other top-ranking high rankers, Yu-Wan had no power, but he had the potential that had been recognized so far. What's important about the ranking? It's all over when the world is ruined. Yu-Wan, who wasn't very interested in the rankings. As a human being, he sometimes wondered what his ranking would be and searched for it, but he didn't feel particularly happy about it. To begin with, Yu-Wan had been to a higher place than this, so it was natural. Thud. After throwing the kit he was holding back on the ground, Yu-Wan started to walk the path he was on. The place he arrived at like that was. Yes, welcome. This is Olympus Sun Carriage. Cheap, cheap. It was a rental shop that rented out replica versions of the Sun Carriage. The manager of the rental shop found Yu-Wan and asked with curious eyes. Are you using it alone? Yeah, up to 10 people can use it. The price is the same. Still. I'm alone. The manager didn't ask the same question anymore after Yu-Wan's firm answer. Embarrassed, he asked, releasing the reins of one of the Sun carriages. Where are you going? The price varies depending on the destination. Up, where up? Literally up. Yu-Wan raised his hand to the ceiling of the rental shop. He pointed to the high sky above it. The ceiling. Chapter 404. The administrator's gaze followed Yu-Wan's finger. All he could see was the low ceiling of the rental shop. Ceiling. It was high, but it was a height that even average rankers could jump up to. There was probably no one in the world who would be crazy enough to rent a sun chariot to climb to such a height. Furthermore, if his memory served him right, the person in front of him was a top high ranker who had recently emerged. Is he trying to go up to the sky, right now? What on earth could be in that empty sky? The administrator looked up and wondered for a moment. In Yuan's eyes, he seemed to see a question mark above his head. Well, it doesn't matter if it's known now. It didn't matter much if he noticed it or not. Instead, what was urgent now was the sun chariot. Can you hurry it up a bit? Yes. The administrator hurriedly began to move at Yuan's urging. Since the destination was unclear, the proper usage fee was not calculated. It was up to Yuan to decide how high the sky was and how long he would use the sun chariot. Here you go. The usage fee is 1,000 points for now, calculated at the maximum usage fee. We will calculate the distance later and refund some of it. Here you go. 3 million points have been consumed. Quote. The administrator's eyes widened. 3 million points. It was an amount that was enough to buy a replica version of the sun chariot and still have some left over. Why are you giving me so much? I put a little extra in. Thump, thump. Yuan patted the administrator's shoulder and said. While you're at it, buy a new one. Not a used one. Yes. Thud. Yuan got on the prepared sun chariot. The chariot started with a hot burst of heat. Soon, the administrator could only look on with a bewildered expression as the chariot exited through the exit. It wasn't that he didn't want to, but it seemed like he was contemplating the fact that 3 million points was not a small amount. This should be enough to buy a new one. It may have seemed shameless, but Yuan knew it was sorry. With 3 million points, it would be possible to purchase a new replica version of the sun chariot from Olympus instead of the used one he was riding now. It was more than enough, even with the labor costs. And there was one reason why Yuan paid such a high price. Screech. The wheels of the sun chariot, which had been climbing endlessly into the sky, began to overload. It's starting. Yuan looked down from the sun chariot and saw the city below, which had become as small as a toy. The chariot was getting closer to the sun. No matter how hot the flames it emitted and how it flew through the sky, this sun chariot was ultimately just an item created by Hephaestus and other rankers. Screech. The wheels slowly began to melt and burn. It was the beginning of the gate. It was a coincidence that I found the gate. Everyone knew about it at the time. The first person to find the gate to the next floor was a not-so-great ranker named Icarus. My father and I were raiding a dungeon on the 100th floor when we got lost in a labyrinth. It was a labyrinth where we couldn't tell where the exit was or if there was an end. He created wings to escape the labyrinth. With no special flying skills, it was his only option. The labyrinth he was trapped in extended high into the sky. I made wings and flew through the sky to escape the labyrinth. It was the first time I had ever flown that high. Ordinary rankers did not go up. It was natural. It was because there was no more above, and because all that remained was an endless sky. 100th floor. The 100th floor. It was a disgusting purple. There were no higher realms than this one in this tower, and that's why the rankers were content with it. However, while escaping the labyrinth and flying through the sky, Icarus discovered something floating in the heavens. There was a door there, a door. It was not object you'd expect to find in Thesky. Of course, it was just a symbolic name. I nearly died from flying up the Reina Transcendental State. If I had given up there, you meetive. Why are you Blingen? Hey, isn't this kid drunk? How much liquor did you give him? Anyway, the point of this story is. Whatever-itis, itupt here. Sizzle, the sun chariot began to burn out. Just as Icarus waxwing shad melted, the sun chariot was melting from the heat. To ender the sheet, it should have broutarial sun chariot, not some fake. However, Arthur, had a method to neutralize the head. Freeze. Acknowledged. Whoosh. A cold energy enveloped the sun chariot. Arthur assist froze the burning chariot and made the interior cold. Like that, we kept climbing. The final push. Rumble. Flames gathered in my hand. Heart of fire acts with secret flame. Flames started to emit from my heart. Intense flames erupted from my palm aimed toward the back of the chariot. Roar. The chariot, which had temporarily stopped, soared higher. Arthur's cold energy protected the sun chariot from the intense heat, and I pushed the chariot upward. Of course. Rumble. Arthur's cold energy couldn't completely protect the sun chariot. Or energies were contradictory. My flamus overpowered Arthur's energy. I could have avoided melting Arthur's, but that would have weakened our momentum. Aztec chariot continued to burn, its ascent grew faster. How much higher had we climbed? The world had become infinitesimally small, to the point where I could barely see any of the cities. I can't see it. Up in the heavens, I could see Asmal, blue a shark. And towered it. Thud. I abandoned the Zunchariot and lapped. Heaven's step has been activated. Your movement speed increases by 100% for 5 seconds. You can walk on the heavens for 5 seconds. Askilbilton Torm step. I borrowed Theskilshfex and stepped on the heavens for 5 seconds. At an incredible pace. I'm almost there. I stretched out my hand. The true heavens of this tower. The only door leading to the world above. Amongst high rankers, it was called the needle Shida godhood. Thud. My fingertips touch at Hark, verifying divine authority. Soon, my body passed through the arch and entered a white world. Divine authority has been fulfilled. Divine authority. Unlike its grand name, the conditions for fulfilling it weren't so difficult. Passel the tower streel successively from 199th floors and reach the 100th floor. In other words, earn the qualifications of ranker. That was the condition for divine authority. Verifying myth. Myth, literally, the story of God. This was that really important part. From 100th floor. As the player climbed the tower, what trials did they face, what lives did they live? What story did they write? Swoosh. A painting began to appear in the snow white world surrounding me. The life I had lived until now. Id chapered before me Isenebyan. And the first color to appear was squeak, purple. It was a disgusting purple. The sky was drawn. Certainly, the purple sky was more familiar to Yu1 than the blue sky. That was because he had lived in that sky for so long. Cheek, cheek. A picture was drawn before Yu1's eyes as if he were painting with a brush. This time, it was a huge pillar. A tall pillar connecting the sky and the earth. And the gods lying on the pillar. Next to it, the Rui Jingu Bang and Son Goku. And he was standing with his back against Son Goku. It's really disgusting. I remembered. I couldn't forget. As usual, while fighting Son Goku, the sky was covered in purple and the gods appeared. Yu1 and Son Goku, who had stopped fighting, started fighting the gods who had appeared. Swoosh. The next scene was drawn. We've finally gathered like this. There are many. They say this is all that survived. Thousands of rankers. In the middle of the spectacle where they gathered. Yu1 seemed uninterested, lying on a rock and looking up at the sky still stained purple. That was all. 100 years since the fight with the gods began. The number of rankers who survived was only a few thousand. And it was from then on. I have an idea. Rankers including Odin and Mimir began planning the clockwork. The story began with the fact that this life was already ruined anyway. And the result of that followed. Oh my, did you hold on? The sight of himself being punched by Kim Myung-hoon. It had already been quite a while. It was the moment I first returned using the clockwork. Was it tomorrow or today? What? The scenery passed by. The tutorial with Kim Myung-hoon. And at the end of the tutorial, the egg from which the maple tree had hatched. The maple tree hatched from the egg, breaking Olympus, Ragnarok, Cheon Madajan. And, come to think of it, there was one more. The foolish chaos that looked back at him was reflected in this world. Kim Yu1, reunion with the foolish chaos. Yu1 couldn't forget that moment. In the future, he was the guy he killed with his own hands, but for a moment, Yu1 clenched his hands and became nervous. That was because he knew better than anyone about the foolish chaos. In addition to that, a creepy cry no matter how you heard it. A huge goat appeared in front of Yu1, its purple eyes shining. Shub Niggurath. Following the foolish chaos, a fight with Shub Niggurath. The things Yu1 had experienced so far were recorded and unfolded in this world. At this point, Yu1 seemed to know roughly what story he had written so far. I didn't think I would have written down my story before I came back with clockwork. Fortunately, whether before or after the regression, there was one thing in common in Yu1's life. My life is all related to those guys. A long time ago. The name of the story Yu1 had lived was Wanderer. Was it because he couldn't belong anywhere and wandered around, fighting and living alone? At the time, the myth that Yu1 wrote had a cold name from the beginning. However, but I like this quite a bit. Yu1 looked at his story unfolding before his eyes and his eyes lit up. Myth Divinity, the failed otherworldly adversary, begins. The failed otherworldly adversary, outside this tower, the other world. And the gods of the other world who came from that world. Outer God, the story of an adversary who fought them and failed. It was a story that could never be written at the moment. However, the world knew all about Yu1's story, who had returned through the clockwork. Whoa. For a moment, all the scenery that had unfolded before Yu1's eyes turned white again as if erased by an eraser. Exam begins. Thetrial begins. Theai Avanidal Tobekami Gadaz began. Chapter 405. Thud. The sky was reflected in Sun Wukong's eyes as he laid flat on the ground. A scream filled with annoyance. His whole body was exhausted after continuously flying around on his somersault cloud for days. How many places had he searched by now? He had practically traveled around the world trying to find Jambudvipa. Where is it? He had searched this entire tall tower, but he had no answers at all. No matter how fast he was on his somersault cloud, the tower was vast, and there was a limit to how much one person could search. Above all, there were no clues whatsoever. In the end, Sun Wukong was so tired from searching that he had no choice but to lie down. As he was looking up at the sky, creak, the long headband on Sun Wukong's forehead shook slightly. Sun Wukong bolted upright from where he was lying. He could tell because he had been looking up at the sky. He's gone up. He couldn't see it, but he could feel it. He could feel that Wu Yan had begun to write the next myth. How much would he have changed after passing the trial and obtaining a higher rank? His scattered mind came back together. His motivation started to rise. However, where should I go? This was the result of just running forward without thinking. He hadn't found Jambudvipa, and he had just been climbing uselessly tall mountains. He was just about to think that he wouldn't find the answer if he kept going like this. Step. He heard the sound of light footsteps walking through the grass behind him. You're just thinking about that now. Sun Wukong turned his head at the familiar voice and grinned. Big bro, have you been well? Sun Wukong jumped up from his spot and ran towards Wuma Wong. He moved so quickly that his body stretched out like a rubber band, and he swung his fist with all his might at Wuma Wong. Whoosh, bam, Wuma Wong caught Sun Wukong's fist in his hand. He lifted up Sun Wukong's fist, which was caught in his grip, and the two of them made eye contact. You still have that bad habit. You're still alive and well, big bro. You still talk so rudely. Thud, he released the fist he had been holding, and Sun Wukong landed back on the ground. As Sun Wukong released his clenched fist, he landed back on the ground. As if waking from sleep, Yu-Wan got up and asked Hercules, looking at him. Sun Wukong shook his big fist a few times and looked up at the tall Uma King from up close. But how did you get here? The youngest told me. He said you were looking for Qianma and came to help. Youngest. Sun Wukong tilted his head for a moment. Then, after a moment, PFF'd, unable to hold back his laughter, Sun Wukong started clutching his stomach. Ha ha ha, ha 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 ho 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 ho, quote quote, cough, cough, oh, my stomach, ho 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 ho. Uma King looked at Sun Wukong as if he was used to it. He had heard that the two were quite close friends in the future, so he had expected this kind of reaction. How long did he laugh like that? After rolling around on the floor, clutching his stomach for a while, Sun Wukong wiped away the tears that had come out from laughing too much and asked. From the way you're talking, it seems like that guy acknowledged him. He called him Hung Nim once. Just once. Once is enough. He got rejected by his Hung Nim. Words that were refined from experience. After giggling like that for a while, Sun Wukong suddenly looked at Uma King with a puzzled expression. Qianma, yeah, how are you going to help? At Sun Wukong's question, Uma King turned his body. Uma King walked in one direction without hesitation and gestured. Follow me. As the world turned white, Yuan's consciousness also turned white. All kinds of scenery mixed and scattered. He felt like his body was floating up and being thrown somewhere in the world. The sensations he felt in his body also faded away. Like that, time flowed by without him knowing how much time had passed. How long had it been? Swish, as if waking up from a long sleep, his eyes opened naturally even though he wasn't conscious of it. Unpleasantly, the first sky he saw was still purple. Ah, a gasp came out before he knew it. Next to Yuan, he heard a familiar voice. It's still not pleasant no matter how many times I see it, is it? A thick and gentle tone of voice. Thud, thud, Hercules was grilling meat while putting firewood and a fire starter to make a fire. The smell of an unknown animal's meat, charred on the outside but probably cooked tender on the inside. Awakening as if from sleep, Yuan asked Hercules as he watched him. You're still using primitive methods. Meat cooked with skills has no flavor. Only when the aroma of firewood seeps in can it be called real cooking. Right, he said it as if it was nothing, but Yuan knew that the Hercules in front of him wasn't real. The purple sky was proof of that. It started. The test had already begun. He would be told what they were testing for from now on. Revert the failed mission to find the traitor. Mission, traitor. The moment he heard the message, Yuan could recall the moment. The point in time when he was moving with Hercules. And the mission that would soon come. Yu Won's gaze turned to Hercules, left arm. Do you think we can find Ubosatla? Well, we'll know once we go. Yu Won closed his eyes at the response. As expected. The mission the message spoke of was referring to this. Ubosatla, a mission to catch that bastard. One of the outer gods. Not as foolish as the foolish confusion, but known as the inaccurate fool, it was the most active of the outer gods. That was why it was a target that needed to be eliminated next to the foolish confusion. And the mission at the time failed. It ended in a huge failure. Many rankers were lost, and Hercules lost an arm in the mission. Asura, who had 3 heads, lost one of his brother's heads. There was a traitor. Yu Won recalled the situation at the time. When they went to find Ubosatla's nest. There wasn't just Ubosatla inside the nest. As if they knew they would appear there, Ubosatla had set a trap inside the nest and was waiting. Was the existence of the mission leaked? At the time, it was just a suspicion. The outer gods were incomprehensible beings. It wasn't too strange to think that it was a coincidence, or that they had noticed their plan in advance. But still, was this it? What did you say? Yu Won shook his head at Hercules' question as he grabbed a piece of meat. No, nothing. No, nothing. Is this the group? This is useless talk, so be quiet and eat. It'll be hard to have a proper meal for a while. Even this doesn't seem like a proper meal. In this world, this is a feast. Crunch. Watching Heracles tear at the meat with one hand, Wu Yun nodded. Of course. In this world, there was probably nothing as difficult as obtaining decent food. That was why it was necessary to prevent a world like this from coming into existence, if possible. Ubosatla. It was a more difficult trial than he had thought. It would be fortunate if all he had to do was find the traitor, but the story would be different if he had to get rid of Ubosatla. Unlike Shubnigar F, the fight with Ubosatla would take place in his stronghold. Crunch. Thinking about the fight with Ubosatla, Wu Yun put the charred meat in his mouth. It seemed like he should fill his stomach. The place he arrived at with Heracles was the end of the barren land. Not far away was a wall. A place close to the end of the world. There, the other party was waiting as promised. The main characters have arrived. At the arrival of Wu Yun and Heracles, a middle-aged man with brown hair greeted them with open arms, smiling brightly. The one who had originally planned this operation. Daedalus, the father of Icarus. What is the main character? And the one who spat at Daedalus's words. Clang. A Highlander with 4 scabbards on his back and a sharp sword already in his hand. With 3 heads and 6 arms. No, now only 2 heads and 4 arms remained. Asura. And across from Asura, those 2 are the strongest, that's true. Why, do you have a problem with that? A woman with dark skin and a beautiful appearance like a dark elf. Kali smiled at Asura. Are you going to die? Asura made a murderous expression. Don't fight her. Another head dissuaded Asura. Asura's personality was fiery, so once he drew his weapon and started fighting, it wouldn't end at a reasonable level. Asura, who had glared at Kali for a moment, began to sharpen his sword again. Clack, clack, there was a brief commotion. Thinking of mediating if the 2 of them fought, Heracles, who had been watching them, asked. Isn't this a small number of people? Yes, it is. Wu Yun nodded at Daedalus' complaint. Indeed, the number of people was small for a plan to capture Ubosatla. Asura and Kali, the Leo king of the Zodiac, Siegfried, the hero of the Dragon War, Daedalus, the designer of the plan, and Heracles and Wu Yun. A plan with only 7 people. But these are the members. Siegfried, who had been sitting still with his eyes closed in meditation, spoke. Heracles, Kim Wu Yun, Asura, Kali, each and every one of them is a key player. Hey, what about me, the team member who had expressed his concerns in the first battle with Ubosatla? The words came from the Leo King, a high ranker who had once led the giant guild, the Zodiac. Am I being left out? I'm not ignoring you, it's just that. Just what? Well, it's just that in here. Siegfried shrugged and turned his gaze to Heracles. That was when the Leo King's body flinched. Heracles, who had been talking to Daedalus about recent events, happened to make eye contact with the Leo King. The Leo King's gaze dropped. He had been humiliated in a fight with Heracles a long time ago. And Wu Yun, who had been watching his teammates, thought. One of these 2. Wu Yun looked at each of his teammates one by one. First, Daedalus. He's the most likely. He was the designer of this plan. He knew the geography of this tower better than anyone else, and he was in charge of setting traps and designing strategies. He knew the plan better than anyone else and had designed it himself, so he was the most likely. Next is the Leo King. He had a grudge against Heracles. Although they had joined forces for the moment because of the greater enemy, the outer god, it was a well-known fact in the tower that the Zodiac, led by the Leo King, was targeting Heracles. Of course, that doesn't mean I can't suspect the others. Wu Yan knew from experience. If not for Heracles or Asura, who had sacrificed their arms to save their teammates, everyone here would have been suspect. It's not Heracles. And of course, it's not me. The plan had been small. Wu Yan's gaze swept over each of his teammates. Now, who is it? Chapter 406. One day after the break. Let's decide on the positions first. Daedalus called out to his team members. A blueprint made with his magic was drawn in the air. This is the nest of the Ubosatla. The area is about 3 kilometers. It's not that big. Isn't it big if it's 3 kilometers? At the Lion King's question, Daedalus, who had seen the Ubosatla before, laughed. You wouldn't say that if you consider the size of the Ubosatla. Before carrying out this plan, dozens of rankers including Daedalus had investigated the Ubosatla's nest. However, only about 5 survivors returned at that time. And during that search, Daedalus had grasped the structure of the Ubosatla's nest and its surroundings. Hercules and the Lion King will be at the front. Asura and Siegfried will be in the middle. Daedalus, explanation continued. There were a total of 7 team members. Among them, Daedalus was excluded from the combatants. His role was originally as the designer of the plan, and to decide the positions of this team. And Kim Yu-won, yes, can you throw a spear? At Daedalus' question, Yu-won nodded. I can. Hephaestus made the weapon for you. You'll be in the rear with that. Crackle, electricity burst from Yu-won's hand. The Lion King, startled by the compressed electricity, jumped up from his seat. What? A spear? I didn't know you had such a skill. The team members were surprised at the spear that Yu-won had created. It was a skill they had never seen before. However, there was one person present who had seen the spear that Yu-won had created. Lightning. It was Hercules. He was the ranker who had contributed the most to driving Zeus out of Olympus. Of course, he had seen the lightning created by Zeus many times. However, that shouldn't be the case. My father and this guy have no connection. No matter how much he thought about it, Yu-won and Zeus had no connection. When Zeus was driven from the throne of Olympus, Yu-won had just become a rookie ranker. Of course, that was only the case here. Crackle, crackle. Lightning flickered in Yu-won's hand. He looked at Daedalus and shook his hand. It would be better if I had a real spear. I don't have enough physical strength with just this. Why yes. Dazed for a moment by the unexpected skill. It seems like I planned the positions much better than I thought. I didn't know you had such a skill. Am I going to be with Callie then? Yes, because I can't put Callie at the front. I guess. Callie was a high ranker ranked 17th. She had excellent long-range attacks, enough to handle the most mana pods in this tower. Of course, that didn't mean her close-range combat was weak. Now that the positions are roughly set, let's get our hands and feet together. Everyone except Kim Yu-won and Hercules has never fought together. Swish, swoosh, Daedalus began to draw on the ground. His ability as a designer was to materialize dungeons. Daedalus could create the dungeons that he had seen and experienced himself. Of course, it was useless if the substance of the dungeon was figured out or if Daedalus, the master of the dungeon, was attacked. This is why Daedalus was chosen as a team member. Yu-won looked at Daedalus, who had started designing. After all, he was the most suspicious person. The structure of the dungeon that Daedalus had designed and the actual nest of the Ubosatla were different. It takes quite a while to design. Asura, who had become bored, got up from his seat. Then he looked around and his eyes gleamed. Is there anyone who wants to fight me? After looking around his teammates once, his gaze stopped at Callie. If that's what you wish for. The moment their eyes met. Hey, Daedalus, who had been sweating profusely while designing, shouted at the two of them. I don't care about the others, but you two shouldn't fight. It won't end well, will it? At Daedalus' shout, Ashura stopped drawing his sword. In any case, Daedalus was the leader of this team for now. No matter how reckless Ashura was, he wouldn't do anything that would interfere with the upcoming battle. It might have been different if it was the first head, who had the most violent personality and had died in the battle with Indra. Then I'll do it with someone else. Ashura's gaze then turned to Yu-won. But, Kim Yu-won, who had been sitting and resting under the tree until just a moment ago, was nowhere to be seen. He turned his head and saw that Yu-won was already walking towards Daedalus. Thud. Daedalus, who had been concentrating on the design, turned his head at the sound. Yuan, who had already approached him, was looking at the drawing on the floor with his head tilted. What's the matter? This way. Yuan's hand went to the drawing on the floor that Daedalus had drawn. The shape is a bit strange. This way. Daedalus looked in the direction Yuan was pointing with his finger. Did I draw it correctly? What, are you worried about it now? Daedalus laughed as if to tell him not to worry. However, he soon turned pale as he looked into the eyes of Yuan, who was facing him with a serious expression. Think about it carefully, more accurately, correctly. Daedalus pondered Yuan's words for a moment. He began to re-examine the design he had drawn on the floor. The moment the drawing was completed, it would transform into a dungeon centered around Ubosatla, but it was only a virtual dungeon based on his own memories. If his memory was wrong, this position training through simulation would be meaningless from the start. Wait, just wait a minute. Just a minute, was he remembering something new? Daedalus pushed Yuan away with a serious face and crouched down on the floor. The design began again. Yuan, who was far away from Daedalus, watched the design begin again. The design was being carried out steadily. The revised design depicted Ubosatla's nest almost exactly as Yuan remembered it. As the design neared its end, let me see for a moment. Heracles called out to Yuan. Thud, thud. Heracles, who had brought Yuan to a nearby forest, turned around. It was a point where they were far enough away that others couldn't overhear their conversation. No matter how much I think about it. Heracles looked at Yuan's hand. That was my father's thunderbolt. Zeus, thunderbolt. Having endured it with his body several times, Heracles was more sensitive to Yuan's thunderbolt than anyone else. It wasn't just an imitation. Even the source of the power was the same. So, what the hell was that? As if to explain quickly. At Heracles' urging, Yuan opened his mouth. I've met him. When? Not here. Here, clockwork. Heracles' expression turned curious for a moment at Yuan's answer. Why was he suddenly talking about something that had been discussed with Odin and Kronos a long time ago? Don't tell me. Heracles' eyes widened. Don't overreact. Whoosh. Yuan's eyes turned red. Yuan's eyes, which scanned the surroundings with the fire eyes of the phoenix, took in a blurry and indistinct form. Wasan Jiamjung's blurry and unclear figure entered Yuan's eyes, who was looking around. Who among the 7 team members stuck with Ubosatla? Wasan Jiamjung has discovered Kali's 108th eye. Of course, there was an eye looking at them. He thought that Kali would be looking at them out of curiosity. Yuan flicked his finger toward Kali's eye. Snap. Puck. Kali's pupil was pierced by the lightning that stretched out thinly. Heracles, who turned his head and found Kali's eye at Yuan's action, asked. What are you doing? Because it's not good to have eyes looking at us. Are you trying to keep it a secret? For now. So you were chosen, I guess. Heracles nodded. Sun Ogong, Heracles, and Yuan. The 3 of them were the most talked about candidates to go back to the past with the clockwork. And among them, Heracles was the one who insisted that Yuan should go back more than himself, so it was natural for him to be convinced of this result. Then this place becomes your past. I didn't expect to come back this much. It's the past, but it's not the past that was there originally. What are you talking about? It's like the middle point. Middle point? Heracles scratched his head, wondering what he was talking about. He wasn't as good as Sun Ogong, but he wasn't very smart either. Yuan's words were certainly abstract enough to be difficult to understand for anyone other than Mimir or Odin. And in times like these, it was fortunate that Heracles wasn't very smart. Well, I guess I get it. Rather, it was possible to get over it because he didn't understand everything. Heracles no longer asked why Yuan was here or how he got his hands on Zeus's thunderbolt. Yuan had even gotten his hands on Wasan Jiamjung. In the first place, the person who would go back to the past with the clockwork had to be a perfect person with everything in their hands. A thunderbolt was a joke. However, but why are you here if you came back with the clockwork? And why are you telling me this? Heracles' questions were not yet resolved. Fortunately, the answer to that was easy. At least it's not you. Huh, what do you mean? This plan. Yuan's voice became smaller. It failed. What? Shish, I told you to lower your voice. Heracles raised his hand and covered his mouth. It would not be good for the other team members to know this information. Rather, it would only ruin the teamwork even more. Right, that's why. That's why you're trying to change this first. Well, it's similar. To be exact, this was neither the past nor the future. It was just a world recreated based on the story Yuan had written. So, why did it fail? There is a traitor inside. He decided not to say this. Heracles was farther from lies than anyone Yuan knew. I'm sure I'll be able to tell if I tell him. Nevertheless, there was one reason Yuan said this. Leave the Lion King alone for a while. The Lion King? Why? Don't ask why, just provoke him without showing your intentions. He won't harm the team. By any chance because of that guy? Heracles' expression hardened. Heracles also knew that the Lion King had harbored a grudge against him for a long time. If by any chance this plan had failed because of his fault, he would not let it go. You'll find out the details later. You two there. Daedalus's voice. Yuan and Heracles' heads turned at the same time. It's done. Come on. Ubbo-Satla's nest. Yuan planned to use the virtual dungeon created by Daedalus as the stage. It would be nice if I could find it here. Of the 7 team members, who has become attached to the Ubbo-Satla? Chapter 407. Daedalus's dungeon was known for being almost perfectly realistic. As an old-timer from Olympus, he mostly played the role of laying traps in battle, but strangely enough, his traps didn't work on outer gods. That was why Daedalus's role was mostly to support the other team members in coordinating. In other words, he was a kind of supporter. Thud. Inside the dungeon Daedalus had created, the team members who had descended underground confirmed the message that they had arrived at Ubbo-Satla's nest. To even implement a message, Siegfried looked around the inside of the dungeon and exclaimed in admiration. It's really realistic. There wasn't a single team member who hadn't entered Daedalus's dungeon before. Daedalus's dungeon was that popular among their group. This dungeon was the most difficult of them all. Siegfried asked, looking up at the black ceiling that had suddenly appeared, covering the sky. Is this Ubbo-Satla's nest? If I remember correctly, it's probably almost exactly the same. The details might be a little different though. There's no need to remember the details. What's important is the structure and the abilities of the guys. I made sure to do that carefully. Creak. At Daedalus's gesture, a picture appeared in the void. A picture resembling a maze. It was a blueprint that depicted this dungeon simply. Remember this well, if you want to conquer this nest. At those words, the other team members including Yuan began to memorize the blueprint that Daedalus had created. Of course, Yuan wasn't simply memorizing it. It's almost similar. It had been so long that his memory was hazy. But the blueprint he saw before him now roughly matched what Yuan remembered. Has everyone memorized it? Yeah, roughly. We'll know it better once we experience it. Then I'll head out now. Work hard, everyone. Daedalus's figure became hazy. His role as a designer ended here. Now it was the turn of the other team members, who were fighters. Glance. Heracles glanced at Yuan. It was an unnatural glance, looking at him every once in a while instead of just looking at him openly. He's still not good at acting. Fortunately, the other team members weren't paying much attention to Heracles' behavior. In any case, Ubbo-Satla's dungeon had been created. Now, it was time to shake up the team members. Crash. The object that had been cut by Siegfried's sword writhed and fell to the floor. The outer god, which melted and dispersed into purple smoke, made the Lion King growl, baring his teeth. These damn things are causing trouble here too. The numbers are increasing, and considerably, at that. The length of the path is the same as what I remember. It doesn't look very dangerous either. Exchanging opinions, the team members continued to advance. Slowly, so as not to be caught by Ubbo-Satla. Heracles and the Lion King, who were in the front, pushed back the outer gods, while Siegfried and Asura cut down the outer gods that scattered in all directions. Yuan and Kali, who were at the very back, had nothing to do yet. A short break. No, an inspection. Siegfried drew the path they had taken on the floor with his sword. This is the halfway point. There were several outer gods distributed throughout Ubbo-Satla's nest. And perhaps this was an environment that Daedalus had learned about by coming here in advance with other rankers. On the map Daedalus drew, this place was marked in red. It means that the dangerous zone begins. Until now, they had only been at the entrance. Ubbo-Satla's nest was just getting started from here. Ubbo-Satla's ability is mental. From now on, make sure your minds are clear. At Siegfried's warning, the Lion King smiled, baring his teeth. Isn't this a fake place anyway? What are you so tense about? That was when Heracles' eyes flashed. Is that why you've been fighting so carelessly? What? Despite his rude remark, the Lion King's expression turned murderous as he glared at Hercules. Observing the two of them, Yuan secretly applauded the naturalness of their argument. Not bad. Perhaps they were not just throwing words around. Even Yuan, who was watching from behind, could tell that the Lion King was fighting sloppily compared to his abilities. Normally, Hercules would have let it slide, but now there was a different reason. Do it properly, pull yourself together. If you make a single mistake, the other team members will suffer. Are you saying I'm a nuisance right now? Fortunately, you seem to understand what I'm saying. The atmosphere turned hostile in an instant. Okay, stop it. Siegfried stepped in to mediate. Normally, Hercules would have taken on this role, but now Hercules himself was a party to the fight. If two people in the same position fight, the team's formation will collapse. Let's put personal feelings aside for now. That bastard started it first. Hercules is not wrong, don't you know that? Gulp. The Lion King gritted his teeth at Siegfried's words. Hercules certainly wasn't making things up. He wasn't the type to pick fights for no reason in the first place. Be a little more serious. And Hercules, why? I understand your intentions, but you need to respect yourself. Your actions are only causing division in the team right now. Thanks to Siegfried's intervention, the confrontation between the Lion King and Hercules paused for a moment. Their actions could have easily escalated into a major fight. Although he couldn't see the Lion King's reaction, he had still gained something. Siegfried is less likely to be the one. In any case, the traitor who had joined up with Ubo Satla would have aimed to divide the team. But Siegfried was trying to stop that division. The possibility that Siegfried was the traitor mentioned by the system had decreased. Of course, I'll know for sure once we get into actual combat. This was still just the inside of Daedalus dungeon. The most reliable way to tell would be through their actions inside the dungeon. That was when it happened. So now, you expect me to just sit here and listen to that kind of crap? Having suppressed his anger for a while, the Lion King couldn't hold back any longer and raised his fist at Hercules. He was just as large as Hercules. Boom! The ceiling shook as the Lion King slammed his fists together. Isn't this just practice anyway? If so, then now would be better. What are you talking about? You and me, don't we still have something to sort out? The Lion King openly revealed his murderous intent. And instead of acting up, Hercules looked at him seriously in response to the Lion King's gaze. Sparks flew between the two men in an instant, just as they were about to start trading blows. Are we going to have a sword dance right here and now? Screech! Siegfried drew his sword and pointed it at the necks of the Lion King and Hercules. Graham and Balmung, Siegfried, with his sword drawn, spoke in a murderous tone that he had never used before. Then let me join in on that dance. Hercules, the Lion King, and even Siegfried. Hercules raised his hand to stop the fight that could easily have turned into a three-way battle. Let's drop it. Swish! He pushed Balmung away from his neck with the palm of his hand. It was a sword that could cleanly cut through even dragon scales. Siegfried narrowed his eyes as he watched Hercules so easily catch the blade of his sword. Meanwhile, Hercules turned back to the Lion King. I'm sorry, I said some things I shouldn't have. Hercules reached out to the Lion King. The Lion King stared at his hand for a moment before turning away, his expression still crumpled. Fine, get lost. He didn't accept the apology, but considering the Lion King's fiery temper, this was a relatively smooth resolution. As they distanced themselves, the Lion King, who had walked briskly and distanced himself from his teammates including Heracles, exhaled the stuffy breath he had been holding in. Wow, I really thought you guys were going to fight. Wow, I really thought you guys were going to fight. Yuan curled his lips up as he looked at the Lion King's face reflected in Yada's mirror. He thought it would end up getting swept under the rug, but it wasn't a complete loss. The Lion King is out. The fight only started because of his pride in the first place. The Lion King never had any intention of fighting Heracles from the start. Of course, no matter how strong the Lion King was, his opponent was Heracles. When strength meets strength, the harder and stronger one tends to win. And there was no one stronger or harder than Heracles in this tower. We've rested enough, so let's get moving again. After a short break, Siegfried led the team. Yuan looked at him for a moment. Something about him felt different than usual. He's not acting like his usual self. Yuan glanced to the side. The ranker who was in charge of supporting the team with him in the back. It was Callie. Don't you think so too? What was his intention? Yuan, who had been sitting and resting for a moment, got up and looked at Callie's back as he followed the team. Well, once he started doubting, everyone seemed suspicious. Heracles and the flushed Lion King. Siegfried, who mediated the fight between the two and naturally led the team. Callie, who didn't do anything the whole time. And Daedalus, the designer of this dungeon. Everyone looked suspicious in Yuan's eyes. But that was about it. It seemed like he could finally see the outline. Flames. Red energy burned in Yuan's eyes. It was fortunate that he was assigned the position of throwing spears. This way, he could keep an eye on the other team members from the very back. Swish, swoosh, on the other side of the large passageway that continued. He could feel something squirming and approaching. It's coming, Siegfried's shout as he spotted the tentacles stretching out from the front. I'll go first. Ashura tried to move out of the line. It was because his body was itching to swing his sword after not being able to do so for a long time. No, hold your position, unnecessarily, Ashura. At Siegfried's firm voice, Ashura lowered the sword he was holding. Got it, bang, Heracles and the Lion King moved first. The two of them clashed only with their bodies. Ashura and Siegfried moved a little later than them. Screech, the number of tentacles that filled the dungeon was enormous. Ashura glanced at Siegfried. Can I go now? It seemed like he wouldn't let it go if he stopped him again. Siegfried nodded and pulled out two swords. Let's go. Swish, as if he had been waiting, Ashura shot his body up. Ashura's elongated body, like a chopstick, instantly split into several. Like Son Goku's clones, not all of them were real. However, the technique of the shape-shifting substitution was also known as a legend in the Murim world. Furthermore, Ashura's technique had reached a level of proficiency that was unprecedented. Screech, crash, screech, the tentacles were torn into thousands of pieces by Ashura's swordsmanship. Ashura, who swung his sword thousands of times in an instant, looked like a ghost starving for a fight. There were many of them, but none of them were that great. It was impossible to catch the team members including Heracles and Ashura with just this number in the first place. It might be different if Ubo Satla came out himself. And in that fight, what the flames, the fire-eyed truth, reveals the truth. Yuan was finally able to find out. So that's what it was. It was a different outcome than he had thought, though. Chapter 408. Wang, Wu Wang, Wu Wang Wang. Ashura's sword was resonating. His four swords were trembling as they began to emit magic power. Both of his faces were already filled with a maddened laughter. Ashura, the Lion King shouted in surprise at Ashura's reaction. It was because he knew the identity of the skill that Ashura was about to use. And so did Heracles. He's already lost his mind. There was no way to stop Ashura in that state. The only thing to do was to stop him from getting involved. Swoosh, Heracles stepped forward, between the team members and Ashura. He intended to block Ashura's skill with his body. Ashura heavenly sword, a huge wave surged forward. The red wave swept over the outsiders and went on to cut down everything in the dungeon. And in front of it, thud, Heracles spread his body wide, blocking the front of Ashura's skill. Just as the red waves were about to engulf Heracles. Shwa, a pleasantly cool sensation was felt in front of Heracles. Kwao, the blue waves and the red sword wind clashed. Ashura's sword strike was cut down by the waves that had appeared in front of Heracles, and its power dissipated. Heracles turned his head to look at Wuyan. This cool feeling was familiar to him. This time, it's Uncle Poseidon. Of the three gods, Poseidon was considered the best in defense. Shwa, the waves that had blocked Ashura's sword strike subsided. The water made of magic power quickly dispersed as if it had evaporated. The team members' gazes were focused on Wuyan. Let's rest for a moment. For the first time since they had begun the raid, Wuyan suggested. Again, the Lion King, who seemed to still be full of energy, asked back, and Wuyan nodded. We need to rest, quote. Wuyan looked fine. No, there was no reason for him not to be fine. Heracles, the Lion King, and Ashura had done most of the fighting. All Wuyan had done was throw a few spears from the back and protect the team members from Ashura's sword strike just now. Let's do that, then. Thud, Heracles tapped the Lion King on the shoulder. Let's go. Don't act like we're close. Heracles and the Lion King, who had been standing at the front, turned around. Kali turned around without a word, and Siegfried and Ashura also began to move. What are you going to do? It was Ashura who spoke as he passed by. He seemed to be still excited from the fight just now, and he had a dissatisfied expression on his face. Ashura was definitely a guy who was crazy about fighting. If you just looked at how much he enjoyed fighting, he would probably be more than Sun Ogong, not less. Just watch. If you're just going to waste time, you'll be able to fight until you're satisfied soon anyway. Swoosh, Wuyan's eyes glared at Ashura. And when you do, don't go berserk like you did just now. Just keep your position. Go berserk, if you fight like that again this time. Grab. Wuyan grabbed Ashura by the shoulder. We'll all die. Quote. Ashura made a puzzled expression at Wuyan's threatening reaction. Asura showed rather puzzled expressions in response to Ioana's threatening play. It was no surprise. Ashura soon made an interesting expression. I don't know what's going on, but now that I'm feeling a little more relaxed, I won't let you get away with it if you're just going to get in the way for no reason. Don't worry, Yuan walked towards some of the team members gathered in a spot. I'll give you a fight to your heart's content soon. Quote. Siegfried, whose eyes met hers, made a puzzled expression. Still holding Graham and Balmung in his hands, he asked, looking into Yuan's eyes, which had turned red. Heavenly Eye is it? Boom. The heavenly eye passed through his body. The feeling of being completely naked and exposed was not good. The other party was equally surprised at the sight. Heavenly Eye? What? How did Kim Yuan? It felt a little different. Ashura was surprised, and the Lion King was bewildered. Callie was a little less surprised. She had been watching Yuan from the closest distance since she entered the nest. She was probably the one who noticed Yuan's change the fastest among the team members. It's not Kim Yuan, but Sun Wukong, the Lion King said after some deep thought. Sun Wukong had the skill to transform into someone else besides Heavenly Eye. Of course, he didn't use it well. It took time to adapt to the body of the transformed subject, and his fighting power decreased sharply immediately after the transformation. However, the Lion King had no choice but to think that Yuan was Sun Wukong. Sun Wukong was the only one in this tower who possessed the Heavenly Eye. What? Then the position is wrong. So I called. It's not Sun Wukong, it's Kim Yuan. The Lion King turned his head at Heracles, explanation. As if he knew something. There is one way, a way. Clockwork. Ashura also noticed the fact. It wasn't just Heracles who felt something strange. The other members were also aware of Yuan's change, even if they didn't ask directly. And now, it seemed that he was convinced through the Heavenly Eye. Clockwork, and so did the Lion King. He joined the party relatively late, and all he had heard about clockwork was vague. An item that can go back in time. Even though Kronos was there, the Lion King thought it was a ridiculous story. But, did you really make it? Yuan did not deny what the team members said. Clockwork, creak, Siegfried's grip tightened on Graham and Balmung. I guess you succeeded in the end. But, why are you looking at me with those eyes? It was hard to tell at once. Everyone here is a high ranker with the highest ranking. No matter how much Heavenly Eye there was, it was never easy to see through them. Moreover, I'm not as familiar with that guy as I am with these eyes yet. Currently, Yuan's Heavenly Eye was not as good as Sun Wukong's. Sun Wukong's Heavenly Eye had seen through everyone except a few, including Odin. Since even in front of Sun Ogong, 9 out of 10 would be pierced through, Sun Ogong intentionally did not use his fiery eyes of truth in front of people he was close to. After all, there was no thing whispering a seeing through people's minds. However, that was why Yuan wanted Sun Ogong to be in this place even more. It was difficult to know everyone sitting here. However, 1 or 2 people are different. What are you talking about now? Where is Siegfried? What? The surprised Lion King looked back at Siegfried. And Siegfried was already gone. Where did he go? Clang. Buzz, buzz, buzz. The solid ringing through the lair. The Lion King's head turned to the side. Feeling threatening murderous intent, he flexibly raised his fist and pulled out a long claw. And in the space where Ahe had turned his head, Siegfried. There was Siegfried, who swung Graham and Balmung towards Yuan, and Heracles, who had blocked Siegfried's sword. Clack, clack, clang, he pushed Siegfried back with his sword in power. At the same time, Heracles swung his arm greatly. Whoosh! As Siegfried jumped back, a drop of blood fell down. A small cut appeared on Heracles' forearm. It meant that he had swung his sword with all his might. In an instant, the team members spread out with Siegfried in the middle. Clang! Siegfried, who had created some distance, dropped the sword he was holding to the ground. How did you know? Just because you have memories doesn't mean you can imitate their personality. Yuan's gaze fell on the 2 swords Siegfried dropped to the ground. Out of the 4, excluding himself, Heracles, and Asura, Yuan found the most likely person. At first, he thought of the Lion King. He had a clear grudge against Heracles. But his thoughts changed halfway through. The Siegfried the first no isn't someone who takes out his sword before fighting. He felt something strange when the Lion King and Heracles were fighting earlier. Siegfried, he was a comrade who had a personality that was the closest to Heracles. It was definitely Siegfried-like to stop the division of the team, but the method was somewhat extreme. Especially pulling out his sword first. It was something that was not like Siegfried and could have provoked the Lion King's pride and escalated the fight. If Heracles hadn't backed down first, it would have definitely happened that way. What the hell is this? Kim Yuan, explain it in detail. Did Siegfried betray us? The one who answered the team members' questions was Asura, who was next to him. That is, swish, a creepy feeling from behind Siegfried. Buzz, buzz, buzz. 4 arms and swords spread out behind Siegfried. We'll know if we cut him open. Screech, Asura's sword cut through Siegfried's body. A body that was cut too easily. No matter how urgent the situation was, it felt like he had moved too quickly. Even if the situation was urgent, it seemed that he was acting too hastily. Perhaps he had expected this. As expected of Asura. His hasty personality remained unchanged. Asura had a personality sharper than anyone else's, and he never hesitated to use his hands against an opponent he recognized as an enemy. Even if that enemy was an internal one. And sometimes, Asura's hasty hands could be helpful. Squirm, the severed Siegfried's figure wavered faintly. Asura frowned at the sight of Siegfried's form, which swayed without form. What is this? He didn't feel anything solid being cut by his hand. It felt like he was cutting water or fire that couldn't be cut. Of course, Siegfried didn't have this kind of skill. The form of Siegfried, which had been cut by Asura's sword, turned into a purplish liquid. It was the same form as the tentacles that had melted when they were cut by Asura's sword just now. It's an Ubo-Satla. Ubo-Satla, this guy. At Yuan's explanation, the team members' alert deepened toward Siegfried, who had turned into a faint mist. Ubo-Satla, one of the highest-ranking outer gods, and the target of the team members this time. But the Siegfried in front of them was said to be that Ubo-Satla, so it was inevitable that they would be wary. To be exact, it's one of the many aspects of the guy who ate Siegfried. What do you mean? According to the information Daedalus brought, Ubo-Satla is. In the middle of his speech, Heracles' eyes widened. He was the second person to notice the situation. Yes, clatter, clatter, the nest began to shake. According to the information Daedalus brought. Me, I want to go too. Before the team was decided. In the midst of deciding the team members to catch Ubo-Satla, Son Goku raised his hand. Asking to be included in the party. It would be reassuring to have Son Goku. He can fill the same position as the Lion King, and he can also fill in for the missing members in case of an emergency. So it's the Lion King, Kali, Kim Yuan, Asura, and Son Goku. Son Goku's participation was almost certain. There was no reason to object. However, Heracles would be better than Son Goku. Daedalus suggested otherwise. Heracles, that guy wouldn't get along well with the Lion King. Heracles is in the same position. His strength and defense are also better. But why? A feud with the Lion King. But Daedalus recommended Heracles instead of Son Goku despite that. I need him anyway. And, it was Daedalus' opinion. How about having Siegfried as the last member? Yuan looked up at the ceiling of the shaking nest. The deeper he went in, the more he felt a sense of dissonance that he couldn't quite place. It's not a fake. If I remember correctly, it's probably almost exactly the same. The details may be a little different, though. Daedalus was wrong. This dungeon was exactly the same as the Ubo-Satla's nest that Yuan remembered. Down to the smallest detail. This is real. There was more than one traitor. Chapter 409. Rumble, rumble, the nest began to shake. At this, Daedalus looked down at the ground. Somewhere deep beneath this ground, his teammates who had been with him were being buried. It's over. No matter how great the teammates below him were, their opponent was Ubo-Satla. This nest was not a place where one could survive by entering a fake nest without proper preparation. Swish, Daedalus turned his body. This was because he judged that there was no point in staying here any longer. But then, why did you do that? Creepy. Daedalus instinctively turned his body at the murderous intent he felt from behind. Thud, thud, thud. A wall of earth that rose from the ground at Daedalus' feet protected him. It was to protect himself from someone who was emitting murderous intent from behind. However, as if to laugh at that, creak, the tightly compressed wall of earth was cut as easily as tofu. Zeezing, thud, the wall split in two and collapsed. Beyond that, a completely unexpected face was reflected in Daedalus' eyes. What the? You were the one. Gulp, dry saliva went down his throat. Susanoo, there aren't many guys who are as weak as you and are still alive after meeting me. You're a lucky bastard. He had disappeared a long time ago, but he was known as one of the 3 demons, and it was said that if he were still alive, he would have been ranked in the top 10. However, that Susanoo had appeared here. It was something that Daedalus, common sense could not understand. To disappear from the rankings meant death. The ranking management bureau wouldn't have made such a ridiculous mistake. By any chance undead? I hate guys like you the most. Susano had no intention of answering Daedalus' question. Instead, he looked at Daedalus before his eyes like a bug. This situation right now, it wasn't that unfamiliar. Amaterasu, who had hit him in the back of the head. The guy's actions and the appearance of Daedalus in front of him overlapped. I'm not really curious, but go ahead and ask. Daedalus hesitated and took a step back. He was suffocating in the murderous atmosphere, but he had to get out of this place somehow. As Susano had just said, surviving after seeing him was like a stroke of luck. I have to somehow escape before the conversation is over. Flap, just as he took a step. Creak, Susano appeared next to Daedalus. Why did you do it? Og, Daedalus, who had lost both of his legs, screamed. Susano continued speaking as he watched Daedalus fall to the floor and struggle. Tell me, why did you betray your comrades? Of course, Susano had no intention of letting Daedalus go. He cut off his legs first so that he couldn't escape. It was a technique that Susano often used when he needed to extract information from someone. Spare. I have no intention of sparing you. Instead, I'll let you go without pain. Kusanagi moved. Creak. Quote exclamation mark quote. Daedalus, eyes widened as if they were going to tear the lower part of both legs. The flesh was cut again. Susano did not kill Daedalus all at once, but peeled it off little by little, as if roasting it alive. The later you answer, the more I'll peel off your body. From your legs to your head, I'll make you feel your head becoming a complete bald spot. It was a terrible sound. There was no way he could live anyway. However, there would be no one who would want to die in pain just because of that. Daedalus shouted, supported by evil. You don't know. You don't know. What don't I know? Who do you not know? Bam. Ubo's Satla, what kind of guy is he? Daedalus is a survivor who returned alive from Ubo's Satla's lair. The reason this team was formed in the first place was because Daedalus brought information about Ubo's Satla's lair. I sided with the scarier side. This is it. It was a simple story. Ubo's Satla was so scary that he betrayed his comrades. There are always one or two bats that stick to the winning side. Swish. Susano's sword tip headed towards Daedalus' head. Then tell me, what kind of guy is he? That guy is Daedalus, body wriggled. Daedalus' eyes, which had been writhing in pain, lost their focus. Soon, Daedalus' unconscious body melted into liquid. Gulp. A body spread out on the floor and flowing down. There was no time to react. Clang. Susano stepped on the liquid Daedalus and muttered. He's like gold. It seemed that Ubo's Satla had taken action in advance to prevent information about him from leaking out. Well, it doesn't matter. Screech. Susano put Kusanagi back in its sheath. He hadn't gotten any proper information about Ubo's Satla, but it didn't matter. His role in the first place was to execute Daedalus if he was a traitor, and to find out the reason for the betrayal if possible. The most important information was the least important issue. Because our master came from the future anyway. You knew more about Ubo's Satla than Daedalus. So now the fun is over and sizzle. Susano gradually fading away. I came on an annoying errand. Crack. The lightning that stretched out from Yuan's hand filled the passage of the lair and spread out. The tentacles of the aliens that had rushed in at once were charred black. More are coming. I'll take the other side. Don't come out. I'll take care of that side. Asura, don't spread out your positions. It was pure chaos. You have eliminated the traitor, Daedalus. You have found 2 traitors. The eradication of Ubo's Satla quest returns to normal. Ending the first test. You have acquired the title, Adversary of the Otherworld. Do you want to continue the test? Siegfried, who was one of the roots of Ubo's Satla. And Daedalus, who put his teammates in danger with false information in dungeons. He had found 2 traitors. In other words, it meant that Susano, who was outside, had dealt with Daedalus. 2 choices appeared before his eyes. Whether to continue the test or stop here. The rank that could be obtained from this test varied depending on the results of the test. In order to obtain a rank as big as expected, it would be necessary to achieve results befitting the name, Adversary of the Otherworld. Continue. Continuing the test. Eradicate Ubo's Satla. Kim Yu-won. At the same time as the message, Heracles' voice was heard. Roar. That was when an alien's tentacle stretched out before Yu-won's eyes. It was close enough to make it difficult to react. Boom. The tentacle that stretched out before his eyes exploded. It was the result of a shock being applied from the inside, not the outside. What are you spacing out for? The one who helped Yu-won was Callie. Get a hold of yourself. It doesn't matter. It's almost over anyway. Thud, the tentacles that had burst from Heracles' fist fell to the floor. In the short time he had been checking the message, the aliens that had rushed in had been cleaned up. The Lion King, who had been leading the charge against them, was breathing hard as if he was a little tired. Damn that bastard Daedalus, just you try to get out of here. Then get out of the way. What are you going to do? I'm going to make a passage that leads to the surface. Quack Jik. Heracles planted his feet on the ground. First, let's get out of here. A body as sturdy as an old tree. His muscles began to swell at the same time. Gulp, gulp, the moment the transformation began. Bang, Heracles, who had been stomping on the ground, jumped up and threw a punch towards the ceiling with all his might. Quang, ku gu. The force from Heracles' fist shook the entire nest as it traveled along the ceiling. The ground shook as if an earthquake had occurred, and the team members braced themselves for the ceiling to collapse soon. However, what they had been waiting for did not happen. The ceiling was intact, only a few pieces of debris fell, but no long passageway leading to the surface was created. It was none other than Heracles. It was said that there was nothing in this world that he could not destroy with just his fists. However, even Heracles' fist, which used transformation, did not budge the ceiling. What the hell happened? Even if this isn't Daedalus' dungeon, it can't be that hard. Geeing. It was then, the sharp sword energy began to flicker as the red magic surged. Asura's sword was imbued with magic power. Heracles had failed to break the ceiling, and he was trying to cut it. Swoosh. Yuan's hand blocked his way. Do you think I can't cut it? You can't cut it. This isn't the underground we know. Then, Daedalus didn't design the dungeon. He moved us into the nest of Ubosatla. So, this is the real nest of Ubosatla. It was something that everyone had expected. The increasing number of outer gods. And the overly realistic energy they felt from them. No matter how great a designer Daedalus was, it was impossible for him to implement it to this extent. Still, I can't just give up after trying once. Asura was Asura. He stepped up, saying that he would do what Heracles could not. However, didn't I tell you earlier? You'll be able to fight as much as you want. Flinch. Yuan's words stopped Asura. What do you mean? There's no need to waste your energy trying to break through the ceiling. Instead, we're going to raid this nest. Kim Yuan. Heracles roared. The plan had already gone awry. The plan to capture Ubosatla in the first place was derived from the information brought by Daedalus. However, with Daedalus' betrayal, all the information he had brought became a maze. Moreover, Siegfried, who had been the team's backbone, was gone. Escape is the priority now. We can't fight Ubosatla in this situation. No, we can. Without any information, how? I have the information. What? Heracles, who had been wondering what was going on, soon thought of the watch and asked. Have you already experienced this situation once? I didn't know that Daedalus was a traitor. In the future, we entered the raid after familiarizing ourselves with the wrong dungeon. The future had probably changed because Yuan had tampered with the design that Daedalus had drawn. In the end, Daedalus changed the design instead and changed the plan to put the team members in the nest without much preparation. We failed back then, but it's a little different now. What's different? I have a way to raid it. Ubosatla. The outer god that was as difficult to raid as the foolish chaos. Yuan thought of the operation that had failed when Asura had lost his mind and Heracles had lost his arm, and opened his mouth. We're catching Ubosatla here. It was the beginning of a full-scale nest raid. Chapter 410. Siegfried. Yuan shouted. The giant slime was hard to make out. Yuan looked at his comrades who had been devoured by it. From behind, Heracles grabbed his arm. Now, the only survivors were Yuan, Heracles, and Asura. We need to get out of here. We can't. We're the only three left. Asura has lost his mind and is barely able to fight. We can catch him here. Just a little longer. Kim Yuan. His ears were ringing. It had been a long time since Heracles had yelled at him like this. Covered in blood and having lost his mind, Yuan only came to his senses then. Heracles shook his head. His gaze soon turned to Asura, who was staggering and holding his sword. Now, he was a ghost with only one head left. Do you want Asura to die here? Asura had already lost consciousness a long time ago. He was only fighting because of the experience engraved in his body. Moving his body while unconscious meant that he was squeezing out his life force. If this continued, Asura would die. That was a clear fact. Okay, snap. Yuan gritted his teeth. He had to stay calm. He had always told himself that countless times. The more he was enraged by the deaths of a few, the more his remaining comrades would die. But what could he do if he couldn't control himself in a situation like this? Take Asura with you. Yuan suddenly raised his head. Heracles had already turned around. From the depths of the nest, Ubosatla was slowly approaching. He could immediately tell what it was trying to do. Don't be ridiculous. Do you want us all to die together? I want us all to live. You're only getting in the way right now. It was a sharp remark. But he couldn't argue back. Yuan's stamina was also running low. Asura had long since run out of energy and was squeezing out the last of his remaining stamina, and Heracles was the only one left with any stamina. After all, his stamina was as great as his brute strength. I can survive on my own. Don't worry, I promise, I'll return alive. It was a promise from none other than Heracles. It was a promise made by none other than Heracles. Perhaps it was the least he could do, or maybe he simply didn't care either way. I know that he isn't someone who speaks without thinking. If he's saying this much, then it means that he has already made some kind of judgment. More than anything else. All right, Yuan couldn't argue with Heracles' words that he would only be a hindrance. In the end, Yuan slung the half-conscious Asura over his shoulder. Asura resisted for a moment, but only for a moment. Pow! When Heracles struck the back of Asura's neck with his fist, Asura's body twitched before going completely limp. Yuan left his spot. Heracles had kept his promise. As Asura, who had lost consciousness, slowly regained it. Heracles has returned. They were able to hear the news they had been waiting for. Yuan hurriedly went outside. In the distance, he could see Heracles limping and being supported by his other comrades. When Heracles spotted Yuan, he spoke in the same tone as always. Didn't I say I'd return alive? Even though he had lost an arm. Heracles grinned as if he was proud of it. Yuan opened his eyes. He had been sitting still, trying to rest as efficiently as possible, but useless thoughts kept popping into his head. Was it because he was inside the lair of the ogres of Ubosatla? Before he knew it, he found himself thinking about the past. This is when I need Cheon Sungho the most. Yuan stood up. It had only been a short rest of less than 10 minutes. But even when resting, how diligently you rested made a difference in how well your body recovered. Besides, Yuan hadn't used up that much stamina in the previous battles to begin with. Well, it's not like I'm relying solely on Cheon Sungho. This fight was one that they had already failed at once. Both the raid on the lair as a team and Heracles' escape. They had both failed, and because of that, they were able to try again. To succeed, have you rested enough? It was Heracles who asked, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. Yeah, then let's get going. Clank. Yuan and Heracles started moving. The rest of their party was nowhere to be seen. They had all started moving to the positions they had been assigned. The map that Daedalus showed us is real, right? The Lion King asked again. He had the worst memory and had spent the most time memorizing the map. The Lion King was worried that the map of the lair that he had memorized with so much difficulty might be wrong. The map is real. That's fortunate. The map is real. That's a relief. Instead of the blocked ceiling, what appeared before Yuan's eyes now was a sky that had turned purple. The minimum amount of conscience. Or was it because he thought it didn't matter anyway? Once he was given the map, Daedalus showed Yuan, Hercules, and Asura, who were the survivors at the time, the structure of the nest they had identified. Perhaps it was because he didn't want to be caught betraying them. So, what's the plan? Yuan claimed that they could raid the nest. As always, Yuan didn't just spout nonsense. Most of the things Yuan suggested had a 50% or higher chance of success. His teammates believed that this time would be the same. However, we're going to split up from now on. Yuan's plan was different from what everyone had expected from the beginning. I don't know if this is a good idea. It'll be fine, it's what you agreed to. When did I? Hercules shook his head as he was about to say that he never did. You keep forgetting that you came from a different time than us. In fact, it didn't really matter. Among the teammates who came with him, there was no one who didn't trust Yuan. Even if Yuan hadn't returned with the hourglass. If he had said to keep going, everyone would have agreed. Thud, thud, Yuan and Hercules walked through the long passage of the nest. Strangely enough, despite having walked quite a distance, they didn't encounter any enemies. There's something I've been curious about. That was why Hercules brought up the question he had been hesitating to ask. Did we fail in the end? Clack, Yuan's steps paused for a moment. For a few seconds, Yu-won stood still as if time had stopped, then he started walking again as if nothing had happened. We were alive, both you and I. I'm not denying that. My return is proof of that. If we had succeeded, there would have been no need for me to return. Was it because of Ubo Satla? Or Shub Nigger F, the foolish chaos? No, the reason why Yu-won had stopped walking for a moment. It's none of them. It was because he had suddenly remembered something he had long forgotten. No, something he had tried not to think about as much as possible. Then, I don't know the name. Like the foolish chaos. I caught that guy. The problem was something else. What kind of guy? It's hard to explain in words. That thing. Sniff. Yu-won raised his head. Yu-won raised his head. It was because he knew that if he stayed there any longer, he would be caught up in it as well. The sky that Yu-won saw now was not the ceiling that was blocking it, but the sky beyond it that had turned purple. A purple sky. If it weren't for this situation, he would have thought it was pretty. But when he saw its true nature, Yu-won and his colleagues had no choice but to give up on winning this fight. We gave up on the conquest because of that sky itself. The sky, it's no use knowing in advance. For now, let's focus on conquering Wubo Satla. Creak. Yu-won stopped in front of the wall in front of him. We're here. This is it. Groan. Heracles clenched his fist. So did Yu-won. The power of the giant resides in your right arm. Fire of the giant king resides in your arm. Complete gigantification has manifested. Crash. Flash. Surtur's flames and power dwelled in his arm. Heracles glanced at Yu-won's arm. You've mastered gigantification as well. It's much better than I thought. Let's talk later and focus. It might get harder if we don't break through in one go. I know. At the same time, rumble, rumble, the ceiling of the nest rang out through the floor that Yu-won and Heracles were standing on. Their eyes stared at the wall blocking their way. Daedalus's map only showed them this far. But, there was a wall. A wall, the room that Wubo Satla tried to hide the most. The place Callie found while looking for an escape route. Your eyes may not be as good as Wanajium's, but they're good enough to see through a blocked wall. Beyond the end of the nest, which was not marked on Daedalus's map. Yu-won and Heracles simultaneously extended their fists toward it. Buzz. Bang. The wall shook. It was the same as when they hit the ceiling. The wall did not break. However, the situation was different now than when they had no intention of leaving the nest in the first place. Bang. Bang. Crack. Creak. Yu-won and Heracles continued to pound on the wall. The wall, which had not moved at first, began to crack as the two of them pounded on it together. Step back. At Heracles' signal, Yu-won stepped back without hesitation. Because he knew that if he stayed there, he would get caught up in it as well. The crack the two of them had made together. Hoop. Heracles stretched out his fist with all his might towards the center of the crack. Kwang. It was one shot. With the last shot, not only the crack but the entire wall flew away. The magic power that stretched out from his fist pierced the wall. Beyond the thick smoke, a vast space dimly appeared. Heracles looked at the space with his fist still outstretched. It was real. Thump. A huge circular space. In the middle of it, a round, purple droplet beating like a heart at a steady beat. And one stone slab inside it. Heracles looked around the ground he was standing on and the ceiling that was connected to the wall. This whole nest was Ubo's Satla. Why are you so impressed? Pajijijik. A dazzling flash of lightning erupted from behind. Quirang. Lightning flashed past Heracles like light, next to him. In an instant, the lightning flew towards the droplet surrounding the stone slab. However, Chijijik, the lightning disappeared without ever reaching the stone slab. It literally vanished. The droplet surrounding the stone slab absorbed the lightning that Eugene fired, like a sponge sucking up water. As expected, it's protecting that. Could that be its real heart? On the surface, it looked like a stone slab, but Ubo's Satla desperately guarded it. Hiding this room in the first place seemed to be for the purpose of hiding that stone slab. Gulp. Liquid dripping from the ceiling began to fill the floor. Soon, it became a lump and moved in the form of a unicellular organism like slime. They did not attack Eugene or Heracles. Instead, they filled the area around it like the droplet surrounding the stone slab and tried to protect the stone slab. Do you know what to do? Yeah, Quirang. Eugene created lightning in his hand once more. To reach that stone slab, he first had to get rid of the other guys around it. Kwang. Heracles banged his two fists together. In his eyes, Ubo's Satla's stone slab was reflected. I'm taking that stone slab. Chapter 411. Heracles' fights were always like a raging bull. Boom. His fist shattered even the formless. Intangible energies like water, fire, and wind were crushed and disappeared before his overwhelming power. Splat! The slime guarding the stone tablet burst and covered Heracles' torso. Heracles, ignoring it, tried to step forward and swing his fist again. And at that moment, something grabbed Heracles' two legs. Flinch! He glanced down at the floor and saw something holding onto his legs. It was the remains of the slime that he thought he had definitely killed. Boom! A thunderbolt that passed Heracles pushed away the slime that was covering his body. Be careful, thanks. Swish! Heracles gripped his club. He thought that there was a limit to fighting the guys in front of him with his bare hands. In particular, fighting these guys without weapons and with his bare body was like a suicide mission. It's not easy. It had only been a few minutes since the fight started. The unicellular lifeforms that looked like slimes didn't have much power individually. At first, he thought it was funny because they were torn apart just by the shockwave when he threw a punch. But well, as he threw a few more punches and cleared the path by getting rid of the slimes blocking his view, Heracles felt something different. My body is getting heavier. It felt like his stamina was being drained. It was such a subtle difference that he wouldn't have noticed it if he hadn't paid attention, but it wasn't a mistake. Ubo-Sattva steals the magic power and life force of living things. Information that Eugene learned from fighting Ubo-Sattva. At first, it's so small that it's hard to feel. But like clothes getting wet in the drizzle, your stamina will eventually be taken away and you will lose your strength. Is it an absorption skill? To that extent, it's different from a simple absorption skill. If that were the case, so many of our colleagues wouldn't have died without being able to catch Ubo-Sattva. He was right, there had been many colleagues who had tried to attack Ubo-Sattva until now. However, among them, there was no one who had defeated Ubo-Sattva, let alone any comrade who had returned alive from the nest. Except for Daedalus, who was revealed to be a traitor. Absorption and annihilation. Spreading out two fingers, Yu-1 explained to his team members about the fight with Ubo-Sattva. First of all, keep these two things in mind. Pow! Hercules frowned as he punched the slime that was blocking his view. Is it even stomach acid? He had his hands full. The slimes threw their bodies to frequently block Hercules' fists and injured his fists. What's more, it's different from that. Swish, swish, swish. Yu-1 reached out to the slimes in front of him. The attribute of these guys is closer to annihilation than corrosion. It was similar to the feeling of skin burning as if it had been touched by fire or corroding like dark attribute magic power, but it was neither. The attribute of those slimes was annihilation. That's why. Opening, Tartarus, roar, the darkness that spewed out of Uranus's heart devoured the slimes. The ring filled with his hand opened a door in an instant and grabbed the slimes through the crack of the door. And in that short time, crackle, the remains of the slimes stuck to Yu-1's body. It's pointless to cut them with a sword. Thud, thud. Yu-1 shook off the remains that were stuck to his body. It wasn't fatal, but if this were to repeat itself, it would be dangerous. It was a ridiculous attribute that devoured everything and erased it from the world. It's not good to drag this out. It's dangerous if it turns into a protracted war. Realizing that, Hercules decided not to watch this situation any longer and not to spare his magic power. Thud, holding the club tightly with both hands. Hercules aimed at the slimes that filled his view and the stone slab that was being protected in the center. Gulp, gulp, Hercules' arms swelled up. He had already used complete gigantification. But for him, who had gained divinity and seen the top of the tower, there was still one more way to evolve his gigantification. It started, a vibration that was transmitted through the ground. The myth that Hercules had been using for a long time was the war against the giants. Gigantomachia, that was what it was. Boom, Heracles, club fell down. Blessing of the sea, is equipped on your body. Yu-1's ring emitted a blue light and wrapped around his body. Quang! A cloud of dust rose up. The hard floor of the nest was overturned, and the numerous slimes that had been blocking their view were swept away at once. Yu-1 was surprised once again by the sight in front of him. It's amazing every time I see it. Heracles, the giant slayer. The name began to be used after Heracles had played an active role several times in the Gigantomachia, the long war between Olympus and the giants. And Heracles wrote his own myth in it. I understand why Zeus was so greedy for it every time I see it. Heracles had once said, it was because of me. Gigantomachia. The fact that hundreds of millions of giants died was because of him. Father was trying to create me. He was trying to create a myth using Gigantomachia and give birth to a monster within it. Gigantomachia was a war so great that it was considered one of the most important in the history of the tower. And the one who caused the war was Zeus. He had planned gigantomachia a long time ago in order to write a myth, a condition for obtaining greater divinity. Why didn't he write it himself? He had already been writing the myth of King of Olympus for a long time. He didn't need another myth. Then why bother? It was because of the bloodline. Bloodline, for the successor. Zeus was the king of Olympus. He was thinking about his next position. He said it was all for Olympus. Thus, a monster was completed according to Zeus's plan. Heracles did not like the blood of the giants flowing through his body. Not born, but created. Heracles cursed his environment. But it was thanks to that. The successor to Olympus that Zeus wanted to create was completed in this way. Such power without a single ounce of magic. Ubbo-Satla, who sucked up magic power and vitality. The only one who could stand up to Ubbo-Satla's power was Heracles, who could exert such monstrous strength without using a single ounce of magic power. Thanks to that, it's become neat. Coo goo goo goo. As the rising smoke settled down, the shaking stopped. Yuan and Heracles looked beyond the slimes that had been crushed by the club that had fallen below, at the figure that surrounded the stone slab. The club had been swung from the beginning to aim for the stone slab. Thump, the water droplets surrounding the stone slab moved. It had no definite form, and it wriggled while constantly changing its shape, creating a face with eyes and a mouth. A monster of indescribable appearance with dozens of eyes, mouths, and things that could be either legs or tails. Heracles frowned as he looked at it. It's disgustingly made. They all are. Those guys. Most of the beings in the other world had unclear forms that were difficult to address with a single name. And among them, Ubbo-Satla was particularly more so. That was why this nickname was given to him. It's not for nothing that they're called imprecisely shaped idiots. Ah, ah, a creepy cry resounded, centering around Ubbo-Satla. It resembled a human's cry, shaking Yuan and Heracles' eardrums. The cries of numerous people's voices mixed together. Wriggle, one of Ubbo-Satla's many tails moved. And at that moment, swoosh, Heracles raised his arm at the tail that was quickly extending towards him. And at that moment, screech, Yuan was the first to draw his sword. Swish, a tail that was slashing along the extending thread. Screech, Yuan pushed Heracles' body back and distanced himself from Ubbo-Satla. As if asking why he was interrupting. Heracles frowned. What are you doing? I told you not to clash with it. I have to clash with it at least once to know about that guy. You're just as ignorant when fighting as Sun Ogong. Are you done Ta? How did you know? Dozens, hundreds of mixed voices. Yuan and Heracles looked at Ubbo-Satla. The guy who had been protecting the stone slab in the middle was now blinking his numerous eyes irregularly. How did you know this place? Amongst the countless mixed voices. Mixing with the countless other voices. Right after entering the nest, the guy who kept telling us how hungry he was finally came out into the world. Wu-Won and Hercules could tell that there was a familiar voice mixed in somewhere. Siegfried, it's not just him. Sensory field is activated. Hearing is being activated. It splits a single sound into hundreds. Wu-Won's ears heard Ubbo-Satla's voice split into individual parts. Answer me, answer me, answer me, answer. As expected. Wu-Won looked at the eyes and mouths of Ubbo-Satla that appeared in front of him. All the guys who were said to be dead are over there. Ubbo-Satla absorbs the magic power and life force of living beings. This was information that was fairly well known to Wu-Won and his comrades. However, Hercules, who had faced Ubbo-Satla head-on, did not have a skill like Wu-Won's sensory field. More than anything, Hercules had never heard Ubbo-Satla's voice directly at the time. That was why he couldn't get this information. Is that what happens when you get eaten by that guy? We have to catch him as soon as possible. Snap. Veins popped out on Hercules' forehead. He was a guy who didn't get angry very often. And when such a person gets angry, it's all the more frightening. It seemed that Hercules couldn't bear the fact that his comrades who were with him had been eaten by Ubbo-Satla and turned into that. However, just calm down for a bit. Thud. Wu-Won approached Ubbo-Satla. Ubbo-Satla revealed himself to protect the stone tablet. If this entire nest is his body, then what has appeared before his eyes now is something like the origin of the countless living beings that he has gathered until now. The most delicious food had appeared. There was a guy who's been waiting for a long time. Quote. A guy who's been waiting. There were only Wu-Won and Hercules here. Furthermore, this was a situation where there was no room to spare for turns. Just what is he thinking? Creak. That was when. Behind Wu-Won, a giant mouth with pitch black insides and white teeth appeared. Formless chaos, bares its teeth. The egg of wriggles. The mouth that had eaten Satan. The one who had been complaining about being hungry ever since we entered the nest finally came out into the world. Chapter 412. The first time the bastard moved was when he was fighting Satan. Pow! Thud! A body that could not be cut no matter how much he slashed. Satan eventually entered Yu-Won's attack range and led the fight with his advantage of a sturdy body. He's tough. Satan didn't have any special skills. Rather, in terms of technique, Yu-Won was far superior to Satan. For Satan, there was only the concept of getting close. That was how strong Satan's body was, to the point where he didn't need strategies, tactics, or techniques. Pow! Even when he slashed down with his sword, there was a dull sound. It meant that the sword couldn't even pierce Satan's skin. No need to get impatient. Swish! Yu-Won's sword was surrounded by black flames. Holy fire surrounded by dark attribute mana. The destructive attributes of darkness and fire continuously weakened Satan's body by corroding and burning it. I have enough time. The fight with Satan was difficult with Yu-Won's abilities at the time. It was before he had even received the physical modification treatment. The difference in mana wasn't big, but in terms of physical abilities, it was as different as a child and an adult. However, that didn't mean he couldn't win. Is it because he's missing a wing? Bang! Yu-Won glanced at Satan's fist as it brushed past him. Thanks to the Won golden body and sensory field, he was able to dodge it more easily. He's noticeably slower and weaker than before. His sturdy body remained the same, but his strength had definitely weakened, thanks to the fact that he had lost an arm and a wing. The blow of losing one arm and wing seemed to be bigger than expected. To this extent, his ranking was bound to drop. I'll drag this out into a protracted battle and slowly distance myself again. And while I'm at it. As Yu-Won was mentally mapping out the protracted battle with Satan. The egg of is wriggling. The maple leaf that had turned into an egg showed its first reaction. Quote exclamation mark quote. Whoosh. Startled, his reaction was slightly delayed, and he almost got hit by Satan's fist. Yu-Won hurriedly regained his composure. This fight was like a tightrope walk. If he lost focus, the situation could be reversed in an instant. Clang. At that moment, his reaction was more of surprise than fear. Behind Satan's back, a giant mouth appeared. A familiar sight. Predator, formless chaos, bares its teeth. An alarm rang in his head, and Wu-Yun flinched. The name has changed to Formless Chaos. It wasn't that its form had completely changed. Its real name, which had been hidden behind the name Predator, was revealed. Chomp! Its teeth seemed to devour Satan in one breath, putting him in its mouth and closing its palate. However, even if he had been weakened, Satan was a high ranker within the top 20. With his one remaining arm, Satan held on, preventing Predator's mouth from closing. His arm was trembling, but that was only for a moment. Wu-Yun was not slow enough to miss the opportunity that had come to him. Giant strength fills your arm. Heart of Oranos creates lightning. Rumble, crackle, lightning formed in his hand. The muscles in his right arm, which was holding the lightning, swelled up, and Wu-Yun's body bent back like a bowstring. A posture for a javelin throw. The moment the lightning that had become as thin as a chopstick left Wu-Yun's hand. Clang! The lightning pierced through Satan's body. Q. Satan's body shook. Normally, it would have been a blow that he could have easily endured. There was a lot of magic power in the lightning, but it was difficult to deliver a fatal blow to Satan since Sinior was not activated. However, stagger. Wu-Yun's blow was not meant to be fatal to Satan's body in the first place. All he needed was a short gap. Chomp! Formless chaos immediately devoured Satan's body, whose strength had left his arm the moment he was struck by the lightning. Wu-Yun looked at the predator that had appeared around him. He had thought that it would beg him to let it out, complaining of hunger, but it seemed like that wasn't all. Formless chaos claims its hunger. Formless chaos bares its teeth at an unknown enemy. It wasn't just hungry. Beyond that, feelings of hostility and anger, like those of an enemy, flowed into Wu-Yun and were shared with him. The Ubo Satla in front of his eyes flinched. Rather than being scared, he seemed surprised. Why are you? Do you know anything about this guy? Ubo Satla did not answer. His eyes were fixed only on the predator behind Wu-Yun. Of course, there was no answer from the predator. Well, I didn't expect much in the first place. Do whatever you want. As soon as Wu-Yun's permission was granted. Kwang. The predator passed Wu-Yun, drawing a thick black line. The predator, who ran straight towards Ubo Satla, opened its mouth wide as if to chew on the stone slab, revealing its teeth. Chuaik. Dozens of hands stretched out from Ubo Satla. The hands grabbed the predator and soon, irregular-shaped slimes poured out. Thud, thud, The slimes surrounded the predator. The predator, who had its teeth bared as if it had been touched by something hot, squirmed. But that was only for a moment. Chi. The slime attached to the predator's body melted away. It disappeared without even becoming steam, as if it had never existed in the first place. And then, what's the point of having so many eyes? King Wu Wan, who approached with his golden eyes sparkling, raised his sword behind Ubosatla. You can't see anything. Eye of prophecy. Eye of prophecy. The eye that sees dozens, hundreds of millions of futures. Thanks to that, Wu Wan was able to get close behind Ubosatla in his blind spot. Wang. Magical power gathered at the tip of the sword. It was a simple slash. It was different from the way Wu Wan had fought so far. Not a skill, but a slash itself. Of course, it was not a great skill like Asura. It was not a comparable subject in the first place. Most of Asura's skills were acquired through martial arts training, not through hidden pieces or rewards from trials. It was not suitable for Wu Wan, who needed to achieve results in a short period of time. However, strength and magical power in the back of the hand, not the sword. Weruruk. A sacred fire bloomed at the tip of the sword. At the same time, Wu Wan struck down the sword according to Asura's teachings. Remember the feeling of passing through rather than cutting. Shuaik. The stems of the sword that were drawn like dense cobwebs. Not cutting, but passing through. Wielding the sword with the back of his hand, not the blade. Only then could he brandish his sword with a speed that surpassed the limits. Kagang. Wu Yan's sword struck Ubosatla. Ubosatla was torn to shreds. Watching this scene from a short distance away, Heracles raised an eyebrow and looked at Wu Yan. Is that the utopia we envisioned? Asura's technique. Heracles' own gigantification, and Sun Ogong's flaming golden cudgel. He was close to becoming a complete being. Originally, a complete being who had acquired all of these abilities was the form that his companions had anticipated through the use of the clockwork. But unfortunately, it's a bit disappointing. Wu Yan's appearance seemed to fall short of Heracles' expectations. Of course, Wu Yan was not yet complete. To be precise, he was somewhere in the middle of the process of being completed. However, still, that is, Heracles' gaze turned to the predator, who was chewing on Ubosatla's body, its teeth bared. Creepy, creepy. I don't know what it is, but it's definitely threatening. Just looking at it made his body tremble. Even though it was not a great threat to the current Heracles, his heart pounded instinctively. It was a fundamental difference. Right now, it was only baring its teeth, but he sensed that its main body was an incomparably huge being compared to what was currently in front of him. Crunch, crunch. The predator was chewing on Ubosatla. Wu Yan, who had been concentrating on wielding his sword, looked at the predator in surprise. Hey, if you eat all of this. Wu Yan quickly reached out to the predator's teeth, urging it to open its mouth. In the past, this would have been unimaginable. However, for quite some time now, Wu Yan had confirmed that this creature was not his enemy. Spit it out, now. Puck. The predator, which had hesitated for a moment at Wu Yan's kick, spat out the stone slab it had been holding in its mouth. Wu Yan hurriedly picked up the stone slab and was relieved. Fortunately, it did not seem to be broken or cut anywhere. Now the problem is reading it. Wu Yan looked at the letters written on the stone slab. They were characters he had never seen before. Of course, he did not know all the languages of all races, but it was the first time he had seen characters like these. Fortunately, players had the convenient function of the system. Thanks to that, it was possible for different races from different worlds to communicate. However, this information is not accessible. This information is not accessible. Access. Opening square bracket. Closing square bracket. This information is not provided by the test. The interpretation did not occur. No, it is not an interpretation problem, but the characters are not as readable by the test. Do I need the original? This is just states, not the real gaming. The factist had Ubosatla had the stone was reproduced, but the characters on the stone did not seem to be provided by the test. Does the fact that the means that characters are difficult? Or is it just a problem with the test frame? After all, I have to catch other real thing. There were no significant message source state increases regarding Ubosatla, who was devoured by the predator. It was a regrettable thing. Still, there was no such thing as no results. You mean I can use this guy again? I couldn't tell whether this time would be temporary or if it would be strictly when a vote against Saturn. However, I confirm that this gynamed formless chaos had a strong enmity toward the outer god. That alone was a harvest. Yuan dropped the stone that had come into his hand to the floor. If you can tread it in the first place, it's meaningless even if you get it in your hand. In that case, crack, It didn't matter if it was broken. You have killed the fragment of Ubosithla, as expected. I was waiting for the message. This stone was the real main destiny of Ubosithla. No matter how much I killed the other parasites in his body, Ubosithla did not even get a scratch. And at the same time, I wanted. Coo. Ubosithla's voice was sheared from his body. Yuan's lips curled upward. I knew the story well. I know, you're tenacious. The stone broken on the floor was just one of many fragments Shahad. There are still some pieces left, but aren't you forgetting one thing? From the ceiling where the voices came, Yuan's gaze turned to Hercules, who was smiling just like him. Why are there only two of us? Chapter 413. The Lion King roared. Dozens of arms pushed the Lion King away. A scream was mixed in with the roar as his body burned in agony. He gradually felt his strength leaving him. Kim Yuan was right. Don't hurry, Callie, it's done. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. The black waves filled the ceiling. The waves flowing through Callie's hands enveloped Ubosithla, who had been facing off against the Lion King. If you don't want to get swept away, get away on your own. What? Hey, you, the Lion King, who was taken aback, hurriedly let go of Ubosithla and turned around. That was because he knew that when Callie spoke in this manner, it was truly dangerous. The Lion King, who stomped the ground with his arms and kicked the ground with all his might on all fours, hurriedly moved out of the way. And right after that, a wave of mana poured down towards the spot where the Lion King had just been. Qua, the giant wave swallowed Ubosithla and the surrounding tentacles. It was a technique prepared by Callie, whose skill in handling magic was considered to be among the best in this tower. Of course, it also required a solid tanker in front to hold out. Phew, gasp, good work. Were you trying to kill me? You're quick-witted. What the hell? Callie walked towards Ubosithla's remains, leaving behind the Lion King, who was blushing and angry. If you go this way, you'll find the guys guarding the stone tablet. Callie, you go with the Lion King. Me, with this guy, it'll be difficult alone. In the first place, you can only show your true abilities when you have someone holding the front. Callie looked at the stone tablet buried in the debris. So, do I just kill the guy guarding that stone tablet? No, if you can read the words written on it, retrieve the stone tablet for now. If you think you can't read it, destroy it. The stone tablet itself is the goal. Why? Because that's this guy's main body. It was a statement that didn't make sense. No matter how he looked at it, it just looked like an ordinary piece of rock. There were words written on it, but he couldn't read them either. Was this thing really Ubosithla's main body? I'll know if I just break it. There was no need to think any further. He was just carrying out the mission given to him by Yuan. Callie lifted her leg and stomped on the stone tablet that was lying on the floor with all her might. Bam! Just as Callie was about to smash one more stone tablet. Thud, thud, thud. Another piece of Ubosithla, cut into thousands of pieces, fell to the floor. There was no stone tablet left. Asura was only interested in fighting in the first place, not in the words written on the stone tablet. Flap! Asura, who had been staggering with his heavy and tired body, fell to the floor as he took a step back. It wasn't a very fierce fight. However, due to the nature of Ubosithla, it was inevitable that his strength would drain away faster the more he fought. Sizzle! Two faces smiled simultaneously. It was quite an enjoyable fight, even though it wasn't long. Yuan was right. Asura, you move alone. Why am I the only one alone? Heracles and I will hit the biggest main body. Heracles is the only one here who can destroy the wall where the main body is hidden. And Callie and the Lion King work better together as a team. In the first place, Asura wasn't suited for moving as a team. For him, the best team was another Asura who used the same body. Swinging his sword to match the movements of the team would only dull Asura's sword. That was why Yuan made Asura move alone. And as a result, you sure keep your promises. Ashura was able to fight satisfactorily. Furtively, Ashura noticed the remains of the stone slab that had fallen to the floor. The stone slab that had been cut along with the slain Ubosithla. Still, it was better to make sure. Quat! Ashura brandished his sword while still seated. The stone slab scattered into dust, and at the same time, the nest Ashura was standing on shook. Goog. The floor was shaking. It wasn't just the nest that was shaking. The sound of other outer gods remaining in Ubosithla's nest rushing in could be heard. What a mess. Jeek! Ashura stood up from his seat, using his sword to support himself. He had used a considerable amount of magic power and vitality in his fight with Ubosithla. Still, Ashura felt exhilarated by the fact that he could still fight, and he raised his 4 swords. The fight was not over yet. Ubosatla's fragment has been destroyed. Ubosatla's fragment has been destroyed. Ubosatla has been weakened. Yuan smiled at the consecutive messages that popped up. Fortunately, he had finished it before it was too late. Is that so? Kali and the Lion King. And Ashura. The two had succeeded in destroying 2 of the 3 stone slabs. Ubosatla's nest trembled. The trembling was the result of his struggle. Who are you, Joruk? Above the ceiling, a single, giant eye emerged. It was Ubosatla's eye, observing the inside of the nest. The eye was looking at Yuan. The eye was filled with question marks. You were not in his plan. His naturally referred to the foolish chaos. He was the head of the outer gods. Of all the outer gods, the foolish chaos was one of the 3 most powerful beings. And yet, the one who had been active in the tower the longest and caused the most damage to the tower was the foolish chaos. And naturally, Ubosatla was also moving according to the will of the foolish chaos. Of course not, otherwise, there would be no meaning to me being here. Pajijijik. Yuan had no intention of answering Ubosatla's curiosity. Instead, Yuan intended to give a different answer. When fighting you, we thought. Yuan turned to look at Heracles. He had been resting for a moment, but he was now gripping his club in his hand. His fist, which gripped the club, was filled with strength. Yuan nodded when their eyes met. Then, boom, quang, Heracles slammed the ground with all his might. Goom, the entire nest shook. The club did not stop. Heracles swung it again at the wall. Quang, the ground shook. Yuan continued speaking. How can we catch you? There's no answer if we just fight. Quang, Heracles, club smashed Ubosatla's body from the inside. Unlike the ceiling, which had not been broken, the walls and floor were easily shattered by the club. The other outer gods moved to stop Heracles, who had begun to swing his club with abandon, but even if Odin came, it would be difficult to stop Heracles once he started rampaging. Quang, goom, Ubosatla struggled. With a being as strong as Heracles rampaging inside his body, he could not help but struggle. The answer was inside, the broken stone slab. He did not know what was written on it, but it was the crystallization of Ubosatla's power. It's the stone slab. Stone slab. When I broke it, his power weakened. It was thanks to Heracles, who had lost an arm. It was only thanks to Heracles, who had lost an arm, that they were able to escape the nest of Ubosatla. As other outer gods rushed in, Yuan realized that the stone tablet was the source of Ubosatla's power and told Heracles to destroy it. Ubosatla writhed and the nest shook as Heracles swung his club. Yuan formed a new team to destroy the remaining stone tablets. After Kali and the Lion King destroyed 2 stone tablets, Ashura fought alone, destroying pieces of the stone tablet. Heracles destroyed the nest of Ubosatla, and Yuan became deeply curious about the stone tablet. Then, a wave of black magic poured in, and Kali, the Lion King, and Ashura arrived. Yuan said it was time to bring down Ubosatla and end the trial of the otherworld's adversary. Heracles brought down his club, and Yuan said that the moment he finished arranging the stone tablets, the trial would end. Chapter 414. The crimson sky turned white in an instant. As if night had passed and the sun had risen. Fuua. A beam of white light shot down, piercing through the crimson sky. Quiver. The ground shook. It raised its head like a living creature. A single eye that saw the beam of light blinked and let out a feeble cry. Boo. At that very moment, Ubosatla sensed its fate. It was not the first time it had seen the beam of light that illuminated the sky. It had seen something similar before, but the situation was different now. Now that it had lost the stone tablet it had to protect and had become weak. That beam of light was powerful enough to pierce through Ubosatla's body. Poosh! The beam of light pierced the ground. And Ubosatla, who had been nestled inside it, closed its burning eyes. Now that it had lost all the stone tablets, Ubosatla's mission was over. Thud! Goo! A pure white beam of light flew through the crimson sky. Susanoo looked at the beam of light and exclaimed softly. It flies so smoothly. A man standing at the edge of a cliff, his upper body naked, showing off his rugged muscles. He had thrown the spear with all his might and turned his body with a tired expression. Are you sure about the coordinates? Susanoo nodded at Odin's question with a tired face. I'm sure. I heard that bastard Ubosatla keeps moving its nest. That's the second problem. The more troublesome one is the nature of that bastard that absorbs magic power. That's why I was trying to solve it. Ubosatla absorbs life force and magic power. Odin, who had once learned of Ubo Satla's existence, had once thrown Gingnir at it. But the result was a failure. Even Gingnir, which he had thrown with all his might, could not penetrate Ubo Satla's nest. If the bastard's nest has weakened, it won't be difficult to attack. Anyway, it's shocking that Daedalus betrayed us. Can you really reach it? Susanoo asked, looking at the pure white line drawn in the sky as if it were strange. He, too, was a high ranker who had made a name for himself in the tower, but he couldn't believe that he could throw a spear so accurately over such a long distance. It's a bit far, but it should have arrived by now. Amazing. It's not difficult to hit it if you know the coordinates. Even if it's the end of the world. The best spearman in the tower. Indeed, those words suited him perfectly. Susanoo, who had seen many high rankers next to Yuan, knew that the future Odin possessed a skill that was literally different. Of course, he looks weak somewhere. Even Odin, who was like that, was not perfect. In Susanoo's eyes, Odin seemed to be exhausted just by throwing one Gingnir. I'm a little tired. Odin turned his body. He had heard the news from Susanoo, Yuan's summon, and was smiling with a cold sweat on his heavy body. Yes, I succeeded, didn't I? A huge white beam of light fell from the ceiling. The Lion King, who had fallen backward, was startled and stuttered. That's Gingnir. That's why I told you to step back. Goo, a giant spear of magical power fell, piercing Ubo Satla's body. The being who could throw the strongest spear in this tower most accurately. Odin, he had thrown Gingnir at this place. I almost died. You won't die from a scratch like that. I intentionally sent it as far away as possible from here, so don't make such a fuss. Did you ask for it? Is that why you called me here? Ubo Satla, who had lost the stone slab he was guarding and had become weaker. And Gingnir, which fell on top of him. It pierced Ubo Satla's body completely and was stuck deep in the ground. That guy Odin, it's been a long time since he threw Gingnir. Yes, after fighting Shub-Niggurath, throwing Gingnir required considerable strength. Even in his prime, the number of Gingnirs that Odin could throw was limited to 2. If he threw more than 3, he would become exhausted, as it required a lot of magical power to activate Gingnir. Moreover, the current Odin was greatly weakened from his fight with Shub-Niggurath. However, he still had enough strength to throw one. But how did you transmit the coordinates? The kit won't work in here. It was a natural question for Callie, who didn't know about Susanoo's existence. Yuan shrugged and evaded the answer. There wasn't much time to go into detail. And this kind of reaction from Yuan was always the same when he was trying to avoid an answer. Callie didn't ask any more questions. Instead, she looked up at the ceiling, where the purple sky could be seen through the hole that Gingnir had made. Anyway, it's over. After learning of Ubo Satla's existence, Odin had once thrown Gingnir at him. The result was a failure. It was just a waste of Odin's energy, and in the end, he failed to kill Ubo Satla. But look at the result now. Odin's Gingnir had pierced Ubo Satla's nest. Ubo Satla no longer twitched its huge nest, and the outer gods that had been living inside it like parasites were also wiped out by Gingnir's magical power. This fight was now over. Completely. The sight before Yuan's eyes was proof of that. Ubo Satla has been defeated. Failed otherworld adversary has been completed. A message was heard. Having achieved the purpose of the trial, it was only natural. Wu Yun didn't pay much attention to the system. Instead, swoosh, Wu Yun looked at the countless black souls that appeared before his eyes. The King of the Dead faces the dead. Thousands, tens of thousands. Souls wailing in familiar voices. Thank you, thank you. Kim Wu now can die. The voices of the souls were heard. King of the Dead, a title with the power to see the souls of the dead and hear their voices. At times like this title would suddenly pop up and exert its power, which was frustrating. It's not a good story to hear. Wu won. Among the familiar voices, there was a soul that was particularly striking to the ear. Wu Yun's head turned. Between the souls dying in black, there was one soul mixed in that could be recognized by just looking at it. Siegfried, a high ranker who once worked with Wu Yun as a team. He was calling out to Wu Yun here as a dead soul. He said that now he can finally die at ease. Thanks to him, he said thank you. Wu Yun's colleagues who entered Ubo Satla's lair and died inside. While grieving over their deaths, he was able to endure because of the joke that it might be better to die than to continue this dirty fight. No matter how shitty the situation is, this life is better. After all, even the mentally strong high rankers found it difficult to hold on for long against outer with their sanity intact. But they were all here. Phew, The souls that could not rest even after death and had become the nutrients for Ubo Sadla. Wu Yun let out a long breath at their cries. He knew it wasn't real. It's annoying, because it felt so real. For a moment, Wu Yun almost let go of the thread of reason that he had barely been holding on to. He wanted to smash the wall blocking the tower and the outside right now and go out to catch the real Ubo Sadla. Clench. He clenched his fist so hard that his fingernails dug into his skin and blood flowed. No one has been sacrificed yet. He barely calmed his anger. He cooled his head again. However, it did not mean that he could forget about this after seeing it. Wu Yun opened his fist again, which he had clenched so hard that it was bleeding, and made a pledge to himself. You're the first one I'm going to kill. Ubo Sadla. He felt that he had to hurry up with the fight against him in some way. At least to find the stone tablet that he hadn't been able to check here. And so that no more of his colleagues would end up like this. Tisk, tisk, tisk. The world where Wu Yun stood began to fade. The color faded as if someone was erasing it with an eraser, and the time of the world slowed down. The Lion King, who had been clamoring to go back quickly because he was tired, Kali, who had been nagging at the Lion King, and Asura, who had collapsed to the floor, unconscious. As if time was slowing down to a tenth or a hundredth of its original speed, their figures turned black and white. The world was disappearing. Yu Yun looked up at the purple sky visible through the gaping ceiling. It was now losing its color, turning white. Someday, that sky will turn blue again. You have successfully completed, failed adversary of the otherworld. Level up, level up, level, opening square bracket dot closing square bracket. Title, Adversary of the Otherworld, has changed. You have acquired, rank of the Otherworld. The purple sky, thud, the foolish chaos took a step. It was a leisurely step, not rushed. Your slow nature remains the same. The foolish chaos turned its head to look at the little goat following behind it. On the surface, it was just a goat that hadn't even grown all of its fur yet, but through its eyes, which lacked even a single white sclera, the gaze of a being too fearsome to face was reflected. Don't say slow. Say I'm being careful. After visiting the Black Forest, Shub-Niggurath had attached one of its young goats to the foolish chaos. It was a kind of surveillance. Just in case the foolish chaos were to do something foolish again. It had taken one of its countless goats and was using its eyes to keep watch. Isn't that the same thing? What does it matter whether I'm fast or slow? What's important is the direction. You're speaking in riddles again. Shub-Niggurath's goat moved, maintaining a certain distance from the foolish chaos. It felt like it was being watched. However, the foolish chaos continued on its way without any particular complaint. How long had it been? Shub-Niggurath's goat, which had been walking alongside it, spoke. You were going to Satla, weren't you? Yes. The answer was short. As soon as the foolish chaos arrived, the ground where it was standing opened up, revealing a long, downward sloping path leading underground. The enormous Ubo Satla arrived, making way for the foolish chaos. Thus, the foolish chaos entered Ubo Satla's body and reached the stone tablet hidden at its end. Writhed, the opaque form that had been enveloping the stone tablet writhed. However, as soon as it realized that the being before it was the foolish chaos, it obediently handed over the stone tablet it had been guarding. I've seen it thousands of times, but it seems you still have much to think about. Don't you know, yourself? The reason why? How could I not know? My neck still hurts. Wasn't it because of him? The foolish chaos lifted the stone tablet and began to read the words inscribed on it. Deep in thought, him, is not. Before the foolish chaos could begin reading in earnest, it corrected Shub-Niggurath's words. Them. Chapter 415. Crash. Yuan opened his eyes to the cold sensation drenching his body. Blue skies. It was something he had always taken for granted, but it seemed different today. It seemed the purple skies he had seen in the trial still lingered strongly in his mind. How refreshing. He felt strangely at ease as he laid on the beach and looked up at the sky. Clatter. He heard the sound of footsteps approaching the beach. Yuan's eyes, which had been comfortably closed, opened. The shadow covering his body was large, and when he looked up, he saw a familiar face. Hercules. It really is you, the massive figure of Hercules. He was looking down at Yuan while holding a wet lion's pelt in one hand. Yuan got up and looked up at Hercules. Why are you here? You're asking me that. When did you get here? Hercules had attempted the trial before Yuan had even reached the 100th floor. So it was surprising to see him here. A while ago. Then this place is. I passed the trial and ended up here. What about you? Same. I opened my eyes and I was here. Hercules scratched his head as he answered, seeming much more innocent than the future Hercules that Yuan had been with until now. Was it because the fight with the outer gods hadn't started yet? Yuan looked up at Hercules, who was well over 2 meters tall. This guy finished the trial too. The timing was quite perfect. Was it a coincidence, or was the tower messing with him? He hadn't expected to meet Hercules here again. Yuan looked down at his clothes, which were wet from the ocean, and opened his mouth. Let's go get something to eat. Creak. Hercules tore at the meat with one hand. It was a whole roasted pig's leg, but it looked like a small chicken leg in Hercules's hand. He was eating quite quickly. Don't eat so fast. It's embarrassing to be seen with you. I'm eating slowly, as much as I can. The first restaurant they came across in the city they had moved to from the beach. The restaurant's customers kept glancing at Yuan and Hercules. Despite his face, Heracles' physique was definitely something that would stand out no matter where he went. At first glance, it was difficult to tell whether he was a human or a giant. How tall is he? Is he a giant? He eats a lot too. Is that Heracles? He didn't lower his voice, so it wasn't inaudible. It seemed that some people had already recognized Heracles. You stand out wherever you go. What can I do? I was born this way. Oh, if you're not going to eat that, give it to me. Are you starving? Wu Wen shook his head at Heracles' appetite as he ate a whole pig in one sitting. Even on a regular day, he ate a lot because his body was covered in muscles like armor. But even so, he had never seen him eat so quickly. You must have suffered a lot. Heracles stopped eating and looked up. Unlike usual, he looked sullen and put down the meat he was holding. Don't say useless things. I feel like I'm going to throw up what I just ate. What kind of test was it? You're not even listening to me. Heracles sighed deeply. After passing the test and returning, he seemed quite tired, both mentally and physically. Was it the gigantomachy? Heracles shook his head with an annoyed expression at Wu Wen's question. There was nothing he could hide in front of Wu Wen. It felt so real, even though I knew it wasn't real from the middle. Did you win? Of course I won. That's why I'm here. If you die there, you really die. The gigantomachy was the greatest myth Heracles had. Zeus had set the stage, but it was Heracles who had earned the title of Giant Slayer. In the first place, the gigantomachy was a stage for Zeus to create a hero named Heracles, so it was natural. Well, do you want me to tell you more about it? No, it'll be hard to talk, so eat more. What about you? Heracles' eyes lit up as he started eating again. What kind of test did you take? Quote. Heracles' words almost meant, what mythology did you write? And depending on the type of this test, the type of honor or size that can be obtained will also change. While he was putting theme to his mouth, Heracles' nerves were directed toward Yuan's mouth. Then, I'm hungry. Yuan's mouth was no longer used for speaking. Heracles' forehead veins bulged as chef accused Morion eating than ever before. Damn bastard. Heracles continued to eat, cursing him with the strongest curse he could say. The meal continued and quietly. Clank. After the meal was over, Heracles, who was washing his greasy throat with some beer, opened his mouth again. By the way, you're really fast. Every other court holder. Rancor. Yeah. And aren't you already up to the world after the zone, which most of the other anchors didn't know about yet? You're the Same. Anyway, Heracles swiped his mouth with the handkerchief that was prepared. Then he looked at Yuan with a serious look in his face. What are you going to do now? What do you mean? Usually, players climb the tower for things like power, honor, authority, and wealth, but for you, the things aren't goals but means. Heracles prided himself on being pretty accurate in his judgment of people. In his eyes, Yuan didn't seem to desire power or authority that much. If not, he wouldn't be jumping into dangerous matters like fighting Olympus, Zeus, and Ragnarok from the early stages of entering the tower. Yuan had a purpose. It was pretty clear, and Yuan needed power for it. Didn't you have everything you need now? Yuan looked into Heracles' eyes. His eyes were saying this. It's time to tell him. It was a delicate situation. You didn't have to ask with that much difficulty. What? Come to think of it, you must have been in the middle of Adriel. Yuan nodded and pointed at Heracles' skit, which was placed in the corner of the table. Look at upon the current affairs. See what happened while you weren't there. Swish. The line moved. Vishnu, who would have normally lifted it up right away, didn't lift it up right away. It was because of the guest who had come to see him. Are you still fixated on that? Swish. Under the pitch-black sky like the universe. A child sitting next to the edge of the cliff where Vishnu was sitting, approached him. Vishnu didn't even glance at the child as he spoke. Has it already happened? Yes. There's still plenty of time left. It's only 10 days now. Agni is making a fuss, telling us to move quickly. 10 days. Sway. The thread moved once again. A thin, red thread was reflected in Vishnu's eyes. Shiva must already be moving. It's his time now. It's about time it got boring. It's exciting. Brahma reached out his hand. A red thread flowed down from his hand as well. He had only just begun, but he was already yawning at the thought of having to continue like this. I don't know how you can live like this. I can see what you can't. Is that supposed to make it fun? Brahma grumbled and got up from his seat. The thread quickly disappeared. Brahma and Vishnu were definitely different. Don't you ever get tired of that damn fate? Brahma yawned and lay back down. Vishnu continued to stare at the swaying thread as he spoke. I used to. What? It's changing. Constantly. Endlessly. Brahma jumped up. Fate changing. It was the first time that had happened in tens of thousands of years. Moreover, Vishnu said that it wasn't happening just once or twice, but continuously. Since when? It hasn't been many years. That's why I'm still checking. Changing in what direction? Well, I don't know if it's a good direction or not. What do you mean? As soon as that question fell. Flap. Vishnu pulled on the thread. Splash, along with a sound like seawater rising up, a giant dragon-like monster emerged through the thread attached to his fingertips. Kya, the monster, which opened its mouth like a giant maw and floated up into the sky while caught on the thread, soon fell down behind Vishnu. Thud, the small island where Vishnu and Brahma were, shook. Brahma, who had been watching the monster, clicked his tongue regretfully and muttered. It's a monster that fell into the crack. That guy must have suffered a lot. Vishnu, who had caught a big fish, lowered another line. Brahma asked, watching Vishnu, who did not stop. Do you feel sorry for those guys? It's something to do when you have nothing to do. To rescue the poor beings trapped in the cracks of the dimension. That was what Vishnu, the founder of Deva, had been doing repeatedly for thousands of years. And in addition to that, I'm starting to see a destiny that I didn't see before. But it's not so good. Vishnu continued in a low voice, casting another line. I think something's going to happen at this unity. Something big happened. Those were the first words Hercules uttered after checking what had happened through the kit. The broken wall, and the beings from another world who had entered from outside the wall, stronger than Odin. It was not ordinary, for the inhabitants of the tower, who only knew up and down, the outside, was like an unknown world. Besides, it seems that they don't intend to be friendly with us. Hercules glanced at Wu Wen. Why, as I read these articles, I felt like I understood everything Wu Wen had done so far. If Wu Wen had known about their existence in advance. If he had been preparing for a fight with them for a long time. Swoosh, Hercules put the kit back in his arms. That unity is going to be huge. I don't think there will be any guilds that are not interested in the outside. Olympus, Deva, Demon King, Heaven, the number of large guilds alone is quite a few. That was the number that could be found with just one search right now. If all the guilds above the intermediate level gathered, the scale would be much larger if the guilds that were not mentioned in the article were added. The largest unity ever. It will probably be a historic day. And as that day approached in 10 days. What are you going to do? Hercules asked Wu Wen what he was going to do. Whether he would attend this unity or not. Of course. And Wu Wen's choice was of course. I'm going to go turn it upside down. It was decided. Chapter 416. 64th floor. It was the world located at the highest point of Asgard's territory, a place called Valhalla. Asgard's harmony was about to take place there. It's packed. Well, a lot of people have gathered from here and there. There are several large guilds participating. Yolch muttered as he tore off a piece of bread in his hand and put it in his mouth. Walking alongside him through the crowd, Hargan frowned and glared at the people passing by. Did they think this is a festival? You and that guy have different positions. For them, harmony is a story from another world. For most players, the vested interests of large guilds and things like harmony were stories from another world. The place where the rankers gathered became a festival. Players gathered to see the high rankers of famous towers. And merchants flocked to do business with such players. There was no reason why people wouldn't gather at a harmony ground of this scale. This isn't the kind of place to be. Those people, are you? Yolch glanced at the bottle of alcohol in Hargan's hand. A specialty drink enjoyed in Valhalla. Hargan opened his wallet as soon as he saw Valhalla's alcohol being sold at a street stall. Hargan strode forward, ignoring Yolch's reaction as he sighed and shook his head. Hargan headed for the huge stadium located in the middle of the street. Ooh, Eldar, you win. Hey, why is the dividend so mean? A stadium comparable in size to the first-floor Colosseum. It was the symbol of Valhalla, the world of warriors. Unlike the stadium, which was considered a sanctuary for Valhalla's warriors, it was a kind of gambling den where points were wagered and winners and losers were matched. No matter how much Valhalla's warriors held battle sacred, they couldn't live without earning a penny. So this is the famous Valhalla Stadium. Hargen's eyes sparkled. Valhalla's stadium was one of the places Hargen was most interested in throughout the tower. He had only passed by it before because he didn't have time to spare while climbing the tower quickly, but today he had some time. Oh, quote. Yolch shook her head at the sight of Hargen's eyes fixed on the stadium. She had already forgotten that she herself had been snacking on several things. The next challenger is a master from the Murim world. A ranker who wields a giant spear like a twig. Banmuyul. A ranker recently produced by the Murim world. I heard he uses a spear like a ghost. Are the real players starting to come out now? The next match began. Hargen watched a dwarf ranker and a Murim ranker fighting in the middle of the vast stadium. It was a fierce battle. He couldn't bear to just stand there and watch. Surrender. Eldar, the dwarf ranker, shouted, raising both hands. With his small, elf-like size, he had fought well, but he had already fought several matches before, so he couldn't help but run out of stamina compared to his opponent. The winner is Banmuyul. Wow, Banmuyul. Good. Double. Some cheered, and some despaired. It was a common sight in a stadium where points were wagered and fought over. Next challenger. Are there any challengers? If you win the match, you will receive a 0.4% commission on the points invested. Yolch, who had been watching the match with him, turned around. She thought that one match was over, so now it was over. Let's go now that you've seen it all. Wait a minute. What are you going to do? I can't just pass by. What? You wouldn't, no matter how much. He did. Hargen raised his arm with a flick. I challenge you. Thud. Hargen stepped onto the stadium. It was no use trying to stop him. Once Hargen made up his mind to do something, he would definitely do it. When will you ever change that personality of yours? Yolch sighed and shook her head. As if he knew her reaction or not, Hargen grinned and put on his gloves. Hargen, I've heard a lot about you. Banmuyul twirled the spear in his hand with one hand. He was a middle-aged martial artist who didn't have a single strand of hair on his head. He had shaved his head long before he became a player, saying that hair would only get in the way when fighting, and he was a ranker who had recently risen rapidly in the rankings. You're a direct descendant of Olympus, right? You recently reached the 98th floor. My name is already known to the rankers. You'll be entering the same world as us soon enough. And quite quickly at that. So it's only natural that we've heard your name. Whir, boom. The spear in Banmuyul's hand began to spin faster and faster. But it's too late. If a player wants to challenge this arena, they should come in the morning. Now is the time for the rankers. The Valhalla Arena was a stage where everyone from players who had just reached the 64th floor to the top rankers could participate and enjoy themselves. A stage where the winner stays and the loser leaves. Naturally, as time went on, stronger and stronger people appeared. In this way, the Valhalla Arena became a stage for players in the morning and a stage for rankers in the afternoon. Come back after you become a ranker. Boom. Clack. Banmuyul, who had been twirling his spear dazzlingly in his hand, pointed the tip of his spear at Hargen. Go away, kids. That's what it seemed like he was saying. However, you're wrong. Crackle. Hargen laughed at Banmuyul's words and curled his lips as he emitted electricity. I'm not late. I'm actually early. What? The match begins. The start message rang out at that moment. At the same time, Hargen's hand shot forward. Flash. Quaowing. A golden lightning bolt shot out from his palm and filled the arena. Banmuyul staggered where the lightning had swept past and fell to his knees, half collapsed on the ground with his spear supporting him. What? You're holding on. As if impressed, Hargen clapped his hands together softly. What had happened without him realizing it? Banmuyul raised his head with difficulty, wondering what had happened. What how? Why are you asking such an obvious question? Hargen raised his finger. Because I'm stronger than you. Clang, lightning fell down his finger. Banmuyul's knees, which had been trembling weakly, buckled, and he lost consciousness. The match was over in an instant. Oh, wow, as if they couldn't believe it. Wah, the cheers came out a beat late. And in the meantime, Yolch, who had been watching the match, sighed deeply and shook her head. That bastard. She understood that his body was burning up from watching the match. But the shame was on her fellow teammates. Tomorrow, there would probably be articles about Hargan all over Kite. Whatever. Yulch, who had been covering her face with one hand as if she was embarrassed, looked at Hargan, who was waving his hand and responding to the cheers of the crowd. There are only 2 steps left anyway. Just 2 steps. That was how far Hargan's team was from the 100th floor. Yulch, who was a pure blood, had never doubted that she would become a ranker when she teamed up with Hargan. She, too, was so talented that she had no rivals in the floor she lived on. But even so, she had never thought that she would be on the verge of becoming a ranker so quickly. It was all thanks to Hargan. It was all thanks to Harkan. Zeus's direct descendant, he was unrivaled among players of the same level from the start. There was Kim Yuan, but he was an exceptional case. Harkan had greater talent than any ranker in history. On top of that, he's gotten incredibly strong since that day. After Olympus's collapse, Harkan began to grow rapidly stronger. His command over the power of lightning already surpassed most rankers a long time ago. Moreover, now that he was facing a ranker, he possessed power that even the most formidable rankers couldn't ignore. Did he say he obtained a fragment of lightning? It was a story Harkan had told while drunk one day. The lightning Zeus wielded, Harkan had gotten his hands on a portion of its power and drunkenly boasted about it. The winner of today's tournament is decided. Brunhilde, Valhalla's head, wasn't here in person, so it was impossible to stop Harkan with the rankers who were loitering around this tournament. Several times like that, clang, the rankers who threw down the gauntlet before Harkan fell one after another. Winner, Harkan. Wow, that was a huge waste of money. Is it even possible for a warrior of Valhalla? He's overwhelming. No average ranker stands a chance. The last ranker to challenge him was a warrior of Valhalla, a Valkyrie, and a ranker affiliated with Asgard. She certainly lasted the longest. She dodged Harkan's lightning by a hair's breadth and even managed to get quite close. However, close combat is more of a problem. In Yulch's eyes, it looked like a foolish fox sticking its head into a tiger's mouth. That was his specialty before, after all. Harkan was a player suited for infighting. He could also fire off lightning, but it wasn't in Harkan's nature to create a spear and throw it like Zeus. Instead, he preferred to surround his fist with lightning and land a single, surefire blow. A fighting style that suited his fiery temper. Are there any more challengers? Quote quote, quote quote. The rankers looked at each other. The audience grew quiet. Some of the more well-known rankers received glares, asking why they weren't challenging him. But, we can't. Maybe if we were high rankers. That was how overwhelming Harkan's current strength was. Yulch took out her PDA and texted Harkan. That's enough. Come back now. Harkan, who had been getting bored due to the lack of challengers, took out his PDA on stage and checked the text. A reply came right away. Harkan. No, why not? Harkan. I need to make a stage like this before I debut as a ranker. Yulch realized why Harkan was acting so conspicuously from the text he sent her. His ultimate goal was to become the king of Olympus. And to do that, he needed to raise his rank as quickly as possible. This was preparation for that. If he shows everyone here how he can crush rankers with his overwhelming strength, his ranking will be much higher when he becomes a ranker. He might seem like an idiot usually, but he was exceptional when it came to things like this. His methods may have been extreme, but there was always a clear purpose to Harkan's actions. Are there any more challengers? But unfortunately, no more challengers appeared after the several overwhelming beatdowns. 10 minutes passed since the Valkyrie, who was the last to challenge him. When no more challengers appeared, the announcer finally let out a sigh. If there are no more challengers, here, creak. Before the announcer could finish, I'll challenge him. The next challenger stepped up to the stage. Harkan, who had been looking at the challenger's face with a confident expression, was soon shocked enough to drop his jaw. Hey, why are you here? Chapter 417. At first, I thought I was mistaken. Not only Harkan, but everyone else felt the same. Why is he here when he's not supposed to be here? Why, who is he? Of course, not everyone knew the players who entered the arena. Even if you put aside the ranking, it wasn't that long since he became a ranker in the first place. There were a few people who didn't recognize his face, so they asked the group they came with about the man. Then, don't you know, they looked at the group that asked the question as if they were pitiful. For the spectators who enjoyed the arena, the top-ranked rankers were information that they had to know. They needed to know their rankings and other information to decide where to spend their points. Kim Yu-won is, really, wow, this is the first time I've seen his face. Isn't that the case for most people? The spectators got up from their seats to see Yuan, who appeared in the arena. Yuan's face was not as well known as his reputation. Unlike other rankers, it was because his career was short. Of course, it had to be. Yuan had only been in the tower for a few years. And Yuan and Hargan. Why are you here? They were also born at the same time who entered the tower together. Once upon a time, the two of them were considered rivals on the first floor. However, Hargan was no longer confident that he could defeat Yuan. What about you? Hargan had nothing to say to Yuan's question, which was returned in the same way. There was only one reason to be on the 64th floor at this time. Harmony. That's all. No, but why are you in the arena all of a sudden, damn it? Hargan scratched his head as he spoke. Well, he's also jumping into the arena. He realized that he was in no position to say anything. Let's talk about it later. Yeah, let's finish the match first. Chuck. With Yuan's consent, Hargan clenched his fist and took a stance. In the first place, Hargan had come up with this match as a kind of debut stage before he became a ranker. He thought that there would be no better debut than to survive to the end with overwhelming skill in a match where rankers participated. However, with things turning out this way, he had no choice but to change his plans. I'll hold on somehow. His opponent was the Kim Yuan. His friend who had become a top high ranker, comparable to his father, Zeus. A being who had gone too far to be proud of himself. The more he held out against Yuan, the more his own reputation would rise. The match begins. Wang, quarring. At the referee's cry, Hargan's fist was extended. A powerful blow that he had been preparing for since before the start. The golden lightning swallowed Yuan's body along with the punch. Player wins. The opponent was the 11th highest high ranker. In order to inflict even a single scratch on Yuan, there was nothing to be picky about. Bang! Hargan kicked the ground. He clenched his fists, gathering golden lightning, and squeezed his hands. Go! Just as Hargan shouted and ran towards Yuan. That's quite something. The golden waves that had begun to spread slowly. Yuan and Hargan's eyes met in it. And at that moment, Hargan realized instinctively. The moment he failed to shake Yuan with the first blow. This fight was already over. Flash! A light of the same color as the one he had just emitted exploded in front of Hargan's eyes. Quarring. The golden current filled the arena. Hargan was swept away by the current and thought. Oh, damn, well, that's it, and that was the last thought Hargan had. His consciousness, which had drifted away, slowly returned. Before his eyes opened, he heard a sigh and a voice, as if someone was approaching. Oh, thank goodness. Those were the first words Hargan heard upon regaining consciousness. His vision returned dimly. Hargan's eyes met Yulch, who was looking down at him. Da heard everything. It was a sarcastic remark, but Yulch was confident. Good, I told you to listen. Yulch was the team member who feared Hargan the least. She would often bluntly criticize Hargan, who sometimes went overboard with his words, saying that he had to say what needed to be said. At first, Hargan would sometimes be offended by Yulch's words and actions, but as time passed, he adapted to her way of speaking and even became grateful for it. After all, she was the only one on the team who could control him. This time was no different. Yulch sat down next to the bed and narrowed her eyes at Hargan. Will you listen to me? She was reprimanding him for not stopping when he was told to, which would have saved him from this embarrassment. It was true, but Hargan had something to say as well. How was I supposed to know that Punk would participate in the tournament? Even if it was an excuse to avoid nagging, Yulch had nothing to say in this case. She had thought that one or two high rankers might participate in the tournament since it was such a big event, but she never expected Kim Yuan to show up. That Punk, where did he go? He's here. Thud. Just then, Yuan entered the room. He was carrying a fruit basket in his hand. I came to see you because I heard you were hospitalized. You're talking as if I got into an accident on the street. I should come to see you since I'm the reason you're hospitalized. Swish. Hargan received the apple Yuan threw at him and took a bite with a look of displeasure. Couldn't you have just watched? I understand what you're thinking, but save your debut for next time. There will be other opportunities. Yuan saw through the reason why Hargan participated in the tournament. Hargan's eyes lit up as he asked with a voice full of anticipation. Is there a better place for me? There will be, probably. Judging from the way you say, probably, it must be pretty credible. Yuan never spoke empty words. He was the most realistic and straightforward person Hargan knew. There would be a better stage. If that wasn't an empty promise, then there must be a stage prepared that couldn't be compared to the Valhalla arena. Fine, let's just let this one go. You sound fine. You didn't electrocute me to kill me, did you? I just passed out. I'm not that badly hurt. I didn't mean to kill you, but I didn't expect you to be this unscathed. Why, did you want to half-kill me? Hargan, who thought Yu-won was joking, looked at Yu-won's expressionless face and asked, are you serious? Yeah, I don't know whether to curse you for being a friend or to like you. Come to think of it, Yu-won wasn't the type to be overly considerate or anything. Of course, he wasn't the type to kill unnecessarily, but he wasn't the type to show mercy and avoid hurting his opponent as much as possible either. That meant that he was more durable than Yu-won had thought. I wouldn't have come to see you if I had known you'd be this fine. Yu-won, who had visited Hargan at a nearby hospital, was quite surprised. That was because Hargan seemed much better than he had expected. He had only passed out, and it seemed like Hargan would be fine even if he was discharged right away. Yu-won, who had come for nothing, soon sat down in the seat that Yulch had vacated. Since there wasn't much to do before the Concord began anyway, Hargan got out of bed. Stretching his slightly stiff body, Hargan asked. The Concord is one thing, but why did you participate in the arena? Yu-won was rich. The prize money for the arena was quite large, but it wasn't enough for high rankers to covet. It also wasn't like he was trying to make a name for himself as a ranker or raise his rank. Valhalla's arena was quite famous, but Yu-won's rank was so high that even if he won the arena hundreds or thousands of times, it wouldn't change. It's not like you're the type of person who would go out there because you're bored. I had to let them know that I was here. Who? There's someone like that. You were the same before and now. You're a secretive bastard. Hargan, who got out of bed, went straight to the discharge procedure. As he left the hospital with Yu-won, Hargan noticed a man with a giant build, like a giant, waiting at the entrance of the hospital. He said he was going out for a bit, but he's taking his sweet time. A man with green eyes crossed his arms and leaned against the wall. He was Hargan's half-brother, Heracles. I suddenly met a friend. A friend? Heracles turned his head and looked at Hargan. The moment their eyes met, Hargan hurriedly bowed his head. It's good to see you again, brother. Hargan. Yes, Hargan, why are you so tense? Relax. Be comfortable. Thank you. It wasn't their first time meeting, but Hargan couldn't relax in front of Heracles. Heracles, the giant slayer and the hero of the Gigantomachy. He had been like an idol to Hargan since long ago. It was natural to be nervous no matter how comfortable he tried to be. Heracles looked down at Hargan, who bowed his head to him, and opened his mouth. You're here because… Yes, that's right, is that so? Nodding his head, Heracles looked back at Yu-won. If you're done with what you have to do, let's go. Yeah, it was nice meeting you. I'll see you again soon anyway. Take care, brother. As they bowed their heads to each other, Yu-won and Heracles gradually moved away. Hargan looked up slowly. This is no joke. This Concord. He watched Yu-won and Heracles as they walked away. Yu-won was ranked 11th, and Heracles, who was right next to him, had risen to 16th place after Satan's death. Even just the two people he saw were as powerful as a large guild. Those two people were participating in this Concord. He already had a feeling that it was going to be huge. Yulch, yeah, has the list of Concord participants not come out yet? I think it will come out by today. But I thought that most of the big rankers had already been announced in the articles. Yulch also thought the same as Hargan. Those two don't seem like they were. High rankers belonging to guilds couldn't help but reveal their stance on whether or not they would attend the Concord because of their guild's position. But for those like Yu-won or Heracles, who didn't care about their guild's position or didn't belong to any group and moved independently, it was a different story. It seemed that this Concord was going to be much larger than expected. But who the hell? Hargan looked at Yu-won's back as he walked in step with Heracles. Was he trying to tell when he came here? Chapter 418. Odin's mutterings caused Brunhilde and the Valkyries to think the same thing. Valhalla Castle was experiencing the busiest time in Asgard's long history. A guest has arrived from the Demon King. Demon King burial. A guest has arrived from heaven too. General Orangen has personally brought the heavenly steed. Where is Brunhilde? I don't know. Who is looking for Brunhilde? The person who will receive the payment from the Lord. Their voices naturally rose because they were so busy. In particular, Brunhilde, who was in charge of Valhalla on the 64th floor of Asgard, was about to burst her head. Even if I had 10 hands, it wouldn't be enough. It was no wonder that Asura, the monster with 3 heads and 6 arms, was envied. If he had 3 heads and 6 arms, he would be able to handle his work much more easily when he was this busy. In fact, Brunhilde was a leader of warriors, so she was not very good at dealing with people like this. Come to think of it, I wonder if Asura will attend. The list of attendees had not yet been finalized. Brunhilde did not know all the attendees either. There will probably be some who will show up on the day of the event. Most of the high rankers were very self-willed. This was especially true for the high rankers within the top 100. It was difficult to expect courtesy or formality from them. For example, from the Demon King alone, there were quite a few rankers who would suddenly barge in on the day of the event and start a quarrel with the Valkyries. Excuse me, Brunhilde Nim. What is it, again? Demon King Astroth has requested a duel with Brunhilde Nim. Again, the Demon King's high rankers, who were full of fighting spirit and had no manners, showed great interest in Brunhilde, the leader of the Valkyries. They wondered how strong she must be to be the leader of such great Valkyries. And Brunhilde's answer to that was, "Tell him that I look as free as he does." Yes, don't rephrase it, tell him exactly what I said. She also hated to beat around the bush. This was at least the fourth or fifth guy who had given her this message. She couldn't remember properly because she was so busy. Good, perhaps after this meeting, she would have made dual appointments with 4 or 5 high rankers. She was currently preparing for the meeting without any luck, and she was welcoming guests, but she was the best warrior among the Valkyries. She felt her heart skip a beat at the thought of finishing this annoying meeting and swinging her sword with excitement. I understand. Then I will pass it on as it is. Yes. Brunhilde was about to move on to meet General Orangen. He was the top high ranker who currently led Heaven. Although his status had declined after losing to the Great Heavenly Palace and the Great Earthly Palace, Heaven was still one of the strongest guilds. And Kim Yu-won has expressed his desire to participate in the meeting. Brunhilde, who was about to take a busy step, stopped for a moment. Who is participating? Whoa, Brunhilde turned her head in surprise at the voice from behind her. The Valkyrie who was with her was equally surprised. She was even more surprised than Brunhilde, and she almost shouted out loud. Soon, the Valkyrie, who had calmed her surprised heart, bowed her head to Odin, who had suddenly appeared, and answered his question. Kim Yu-won. Kim Yu-won, that guy is coming too. Odin, who was sweating all over his body, his eyes shining, as if he had not heard wrong. Brunhilde and the Valkyrie thought the same at Odin's murmur. Friend, you could think of it as a common appellation, but well. Brunhilde and the Valkyries had been assisting Odin for thousands of years. But during that long time, they had never seen anyone Odin called a friend, other than Mimir. But how come, now a fledgling kid who hadn't even been in the tower for a few years? When did you arrive? Odin said he would hold a concord in the name of Asgard and had delegated the authority to Mimir. Immediately after that, Odin disappeared somewhere. He left messages through the kit, but there was no reply, and it was almost like he had disappeared. It's been a while. I arrived last night. You didn't even tell us where you were going. I was somewhere I couldn't tell you. Of course, you're not someone who would go out drinking at a time like this. Odin was the one who held this concord. No matter how threatening the beings outside the tower were, if it hadn't been Odin who held the concord, so many guilds wouldn't have moved. That's how much influence Odin has in this tower. Brunhilde carefully looked over Odin, who had returned after a few months. He was soaked in sweat, but he didn't seem to have any wounds. It didn't seem like he had been fighting somewhere, but it didn't seem like he had been resting comfortably either. What are you looking at like that? I was just thinking to myself. I don't intend to answer, so just think. Oh, and bring me some clothes to change into. I heard you. Yes, understood. At Brunhilde's words, the Valkyrie next to her moved hurriedly. There was no need for the Valkyrie's chief to move in person for such errands. I'll move as soon as the clothes are ready. I'm sorry I've left all the hard work to you until now. If you know, then hurry up. The people have been waiting for a long time. Right, this is perfect timing. I heard that the heavenly troops came from the heavenly realm, so I would be grateful if you could meet them instead. We're really short-handed right now. The heavenly troops were the representatives of the heavenly realm. Since Odin wasn't here, Brunhilde had intended to meet them instead, but considering their positions, it was right for Odin to meet them. However, I have someone to meet. Do you have an appointment? I don't have an appointment yet. He has someone to meet, but no appointment. What is he talking about? Who is it? The greatest person in this tower. The greatest? I don't understand this either. Mimir was usually the one who said things that were hard to understand. But right now, Brunhilde had a headache as if she were having a conversation with Mimir. Fortunately or unfortunately, she only got to meet Mimir once a year, every 100 years. I guess it's a little hard to understand. Yes. If the standard of greatness is difficult, isn't there exactly one official standard in this tower? At Odin's question, Brunhild immediately. She could think of what that standard was. Ranking. Odin's official ranking was second. He was second in this vast tower, but even he, who always seemed to be the best, was only number 2. Hercules was seeing a sight he had never seen before. A spacious room of about 40 pyong. A great view overlooking the city. A clean bed and luxurious furniture. It was an especially nice accommodation in the metropolis of Valhalla. And in the middle of that accommodation, I'm hungry. Yuan was lying around and searching through various videos on his kit as if he was bored. Order something, I was going to anyway. Really? Yuan being this lazy, it was something he had never imagined. Heracles stared at Yuan. He had not yet taken any action, although he had ordered some food. What are you thinking? He was rolling around in an expensive room that cost 300 points per day. It was as if he had come on a vacation. If it was a room, he could have asked Asgard for a good one. There's nothing to do until the Unity begins anyway. So you're going to stay here like this? For now. For now, there's someone I'm waiting for. Heracles raised an eyebrow. Someone he was waiting for. Yuan must have entered the arena while saying that. Before submitting the list to attend the Unity, he had to make a fuss. Since he couldn't find his opponent, he made them find him. It was a simple but surefire way. Heracles, who had been watching Yuan with curiosity, nodded. If it had been someone else, it would have been awkward, but since it was Yuan, he was not pathetic. Well, it's not bad to rest a little. Yuan had never really rested. From the first floor to the 100th floor. And Olympus, the heavenly realm, Asgard, the demon king, and the heavenly horse tournament. He had experienced and solved numerous incidents. He had not been with him for all those incidents, but he knew enough about Yuan to know what kind of person he was. That he had been running without rest, impatiently. Thud, Heracles sat down on the large sofa to rest with Yuan. As expensive as it was, the sofa was sturdy enough to support Heracles' body. I submitted the list for the Unity. Now all we have to do is wait. Are you going to stay here? Why, where else would I go? To Olympus. Heracles froze at Yuan's answer. Like a statue that didn't even breathe. For a while, the air in the room stopped, and time seemed to stand still for a few seconds. I'm not ready for that yet. After a long time, Yuan asked very simply, with difficulty. Why? Because of your father. Hey, if it's because of your father, go back and see him. Don't you think he'll just be waiting to avoid you? I didn't think I'd be back like this either. For some reason. When he returned from the test, the king of Olympus had changed. From Hades to Zeus, it was just a return to its original position, but that alone had changed Olympus' status a lot. Once, Olympus had a status comparable to Asgard. However, when Zeus was dragged down, his name was on the ground for a while. But now, Olympus, with Zeus as its king, was back in its second heyday. Are you ashamed? Who's ashamed? Heracles, who was about to shout, stopped talking. His eyes rolled quietly. Yuan, who had been rolling around as if he was bored, also got up from his seat. Then, can I have your seat? Heracles asked, noticing the situation. Yuan nodded. If possible, he didn't want any other guests in this seat. If you're not going to go back, you have to ask me to move like that. I heard you clearly. Was it his will never to return to Olympus where Zeus was? Heracles got out of his seat without hesitation. A few minutes after Heracles left the room. There's no one here now. Wooing. A wind blew through the window that opened on its own. And Yuan's gaze turned to Robin, who had come in with the wind. The guy who had followed him to the arena. Now, shall we talk? For the first time, a private space with the foolish chaos was created. Chapter 419. Many people were curious about the face under the robe. However, only a few people had seen it. And Yuan was one of those few. So you really called me? Didn't you come looking for me? There must be a reason why you guys are making such a fuss. I thought you were calling something. The gaze of the foolish chaos moved and followed Yuan, who was getting up from his seat. Yuan continued, calmly taking out a cup of tea. Slurp. Then I found it well. How did you know I'd come back? Because you weren't the main body. I thought you'd be back soon. The foolish chaos had many eyes. The huge guild union of Asgard was currently the most talked about thing in the tower. It was impossible for the foolish chaos, whose purpose was to cause all the chaos in the tower, not to be interested in such a union. He would definitely appear, even if he had to push himself a little. A fairly plausible answer. However, the foolish chaos did not think that Yuan in front of him had revealed everything. Would you like a cup of tea? You're my guest today, after all. Are you kidding me? I guess you don't even think of taking that off. Well, then. Yuan took a sip of the steaming tea. In the comfortable atmosphere, the foolish chaos felt an inexplicable discomfort. However, aren't you afraid of us? Clatter. The air in the room grew cold. The tea that Yuan was drinking froze solid. A clear threat. But that was all. Yuan put down the teacup he was holding and looked at the foolish chaos. That, us must include that huge goat guy, right? The guy in front of him now wasn't the main body anyway. No, far from being the main body, it was only a hastily made copy. So there was no need to be scared. Heracles also knew that fact, so he stepped aside. From what you're saying, you seem to know a lot about us. Same for me. Why do you think so? Because it doesn't make sense if it isn't. Your existence, and everything you've done so far. I could feel the gaze hidden under the robe move. The foolish chaos, gaze went from Yuan's appearance to something deeper. And even the one with you. He had noticed that Dan Ah's existence was special to Outer. However, the fact that he was called, one, by none other than the foolish chaos made him even more curious. Just what kind of guy was Dan Ah? But I still don't know how. That's why I'm not sure. The foolish chaos wondered, just how did Yuan in front of him know about them? And if he knew about the outside, how could he stand in front of him with such confidence? Who are you? Did you come here expecting that answer? A counter question that meant he didn't intend to answer. Of course, he didn't think Yuan would answer his question without any compensation. After all, they were enemies. They only revealed their weaknesses when they judged it to be mutually beneficial. We had a useless conversation. There was a chuckle in the foolish chaos voice. He knew from the beginning that there was no point in having such a conversation. I'll tell you the truth. I came here to hear your story. To know a little more about me. Why are you asking for something you already know? As I said earlier, it's certain that you know about me. But I don't know you. If you don't know, you don't know. That saying didn't exist only in the world Yuan lived in. It was a saying that was true in any world. And in that saying, Yuan was in a more advantageous position than the foolish chaos. There's nothing bad for me in us having a face-to-face conversation like this. I need to know as much as I can about you, after all. This was why the foolish confusion responded to Yuan's provocation. To grasp a little bit more about Yuan. He thought that it wouldn't be a loss if he could get even a tiny bit of information about Yuan. Then let's stop the stories that are unfavorable to me here. I called you here because I had a story to tell. Yes, that doesn't matter either. Those kinds of stories will add up and help me figure out what kind of guy you are. The only missing puzzle piece that the foolish confusion had missed. To find out the identity of that piece, the foolish confusion watched Yuan carefully. If he found out why he had called him, he would be able to get to know Yuan a little better with that as a clue. So what is it? The story you have to tell. I'm going to make a suggestion. A suggestion? You, to us? A question that sounded absurd. It couldn't be helped. How many of the foolish confusion's plans had Yuan interfered with so far? It was difficult to accept any suggestion. To be exact, not to you guys, but to you. An individual, not a plural. A suggestion given to the foolish confusion, not to Outer. Although absurd, it wasn't something he could just ignore. Depending on what suggestion Yuan made, the foolish confusion might be able to achieve what he wanted. Let's hear it first. Good thinking. Hiss. The tea in the teacup melted again. The tea started to steam up. Yuan sat on the arm of the sofa and began to speak. The story wasn't that long. The time it took was because of his contemplation. Quote. Think about it carefully. I'll wait while drinking this. The answer had to be given here. There weren't many times when Yuan would openly reveal his position like this. The foolish confusion also knew that, which was why he couldn't just leave after hearing the suggestion. A long silence. After standing there like a tree for a while, lost in thought, the foolish confusion looked back at Yuan's eyes. You must have a purpose for making such a suggestion. I'm making this suggestion because you and I have the same purpose. How did you know about that? Did you come from the future? It was a remark that hit the nail on the head, but Yuan didn't show it. When Yuan didn't fall for his attempt to gauge his expression, the foolish confusion eventually couldn't waste any more time. All except, yes. At that answer, Yuan had to work hard to stop the corners of his mouth from rising. What if he didn't accept the offer? If the first button wasn't sewn on, he was quite worried about what would happen. However, you can laugh. Don't you feel like you're going crazy? The foolish confusion saw through Yuan's true intentions. Thanks to the fraudulent advantage of knowing the future, he had messed up the plans that Yuan had made so far, but he was like an aide to the outer god. He wasn't such a fool as to not know that Yuan was laughing inside. I feel like I'm getting caught up in your plan, but well, it's not a bad suggestion for me either. Then we're done talking. I'll move when the time comes. I'll leave it up to you to decide when that is. I understand. Yuan nodded his head. And at that moment, bam, the foolish confusion's head flew away from the club that flew from behind. Sizzle, purple smoke rose above his head that had flown away. With the signal, Hercules had blown off the foolish confusion's head. We're not on such good terms that we can just wave goodbye, right? Sizzle, sizzle, maybe it was because his head had flown away. The incarnation of the foolish confusion, who had lost his life, lost his strength and scattered. And in the midst of the smoke that scattered, it doesn't matter, as long as we keep our promise. The voice of the foolish chaos rang out. From the beginning, whether or not he had anticipated this situation, his reaction wasn't that of being flustered. Yuan nodded his head. That was what he wanted as well. Don't worry about that, I'll be waiting. Swish. All the smoke dispersed and disappeared. That was the end of it. A reunion with the foolish chaos that wasn't good or bad. What kind of promise did you make? Clang. It was Heracles' question as he had his club on his shoulder. He seemed to know that the two had talked about something and had made some kind of promise. Heracles had not heard the details of their conversation. There is something like that. You don't need to tell me what the promise is. But aren't you two enemies? Heracles' worries were understandable. Do you think that promise will be kept? Their relationship was not good. Furthermore, if it was true that they had come from outside the tower and were hostile towards them, then a promise was the least of their worries. Even Heracles, who wasn't as smart as Yuan, could understand that much. However, what we made wasn't a promise. Then, we shared the fact that our goals are the same. Yuan didn't trust the foolish chaos either. The inside and outside of the tower were clear enemies, and the concept of joining hands was not something that could be established. Despite that, the reason Yuan had reached out to the foolish chaos was one thing. This is a fight that we absolutely cannot win on our own. There were opponents that couldn't be defeated without borrowing strength even from the enemy of an enemy. Based on the shared information, that guy and we will move. It's not just them who can break the promise. We don't need to keep that promise either. Then what is the promise? It's like a map to reach the destination. But if there is another way to get to that destination. Yuan's lips curled up as he held back his laughter. We will find another way to get there. Then why make a promise with someone you're not going to keep? Heracles, who had been speaking, asked again with a puzzled look. We. Yuan nodded his head. We. Those two words were the core of this promise. Neither that guy nor I have any intention of keeping a promise. From now on, it was a battle of wits. The same goal that each of them wanted. The method to achieve that goal. To do that, they had to use each other and sometimes join hands. What a headache. When is a headache not a headache? Thud. Yuan briefly shook off his complicated thoughts and plopped down on the sofa. He sat down as if he was half lying down. As Yuan looked up at the ceiling, he recalled the time when he had come up with this plan. Quote quote, quote quote, everyone was silent, an enemy that they couldn't defeat. They couldn't find an answer to how they were going to fight that enemy. Even after several hours, no one opened their mouths. They should have said something, even if it was a ridiculous idea, but not even a ridiculous idea came out. Around that time, the members realized something. That even if they went back in time, it would be useless in the face of overwhelming power. We're screwed. What can we do when there's no way? Should we just charge in together? Will you please be quiet? Sun Wukong's opinion to just fight recklessly was naturally ignored. Sun Wukong, who had repeated the same words out of frustration, leaned back in his chair with his lips pursed even more than before. Another silence ensued. And then, how about this? Yuan finally opened his mouth. We use the foolish chaos. Chapter 420. Day had broken. Several large guilds had gathered in one castle. As a result, the large Valhalla castle was packed full. Thud. Ah, damn it. A high-ranking member of the Celestial Realm, Kyo Ryang Jin Gun, who had bumped shoulders with someone, flared up. He had been very tense since the location was where it was. When someone came up and bumped shoulders with him, he suddenly lost his temper. Hey, you bumped my shoulder. Was he going to apologize? The red-haired man stopped and turned around as he was walking. The face of the man who had met his face had a cheerful smile. Then we have to fight. Quote. It was as if he was saying that if you bumped shoulders, you had to fight. And the confidence in his voice and expression. Just when he felt that something was wrong, Kyo Ryang Jin Gun recognized the man's face. Dia. Excuse me. Click. It was then. Someone grabbed Diablo by the shoulder and dragged him away. Russell. Diablo, who was dragged away while standing still, looked at the man who was grabbing and pulling him with a look of dissatisfaction. What is it, Belial? Are you going to cause trouble here? So, you bumped my shoulder and just let it go. Most of the demons were belligerent. Their world was full of fighting, so much so that cities or towns where fights often occurred were often referred to as demon realm. For them, bumping shoulders and not fighting was something that could not happen logically. Moreover, Diablo, the leader of the demons, had a more belligerent personality than any other demon. This is not the demon realm, but Asgard. And of all places, this is the most sacred Valhalla. Weren't the Valkyries a race of warriors? Don't think we're the same as them, you fool. You just called me a fool. Sniff. Diablo's nose twitched. In the crowded crowd, he had found an interesting opponent. I smell that guy. Smell? What dog? Mana and magic also have a smell. Just like how humans smell different even though they are the same, you know. Click. Pushing away Belial's arm that was holding him back, Diablo laughed cheerfully. This is that guy's smell. Diablo, who had pushed away Belial's arm, hurriedly pushed through the crowd. There were some people who bumped shoulders and glared at Diablo, but soon they recognized Diablo's face and bowed their heads. No matter how many high-ranking people gathered, there was no one who was bold enough to pick a fight with Diablo. And so, after pushing through the crowd, click, Diablo tapped the shoulder of a black-haired man. I see you were here after all. Yuan and Diablo's eyes met as he turned his head. Not long after they parted ways, Diablo had been looking for Yuan. I knew you would come. Even the Demon King participates. I heard something fun was happening. Sizzle. A red aura slowly rose from Diablo's feet. It was Diablo's bad habit that came out whenever his fighting spirit boiled. These days, the world is good. The fights never stop. Calm down. Today is a day for unity, so don't mess it up. It will only cause chaos. Twitch. Diablo's eyebrows twitched. Something about what he said rubbed him the wrong way. You, me, to the provocative question as if asking if he was capable of doing so, Yuan shook his head. It doesn't have to be me. This is Asgard. Swish. Yuan's gaze scanned the surroundings. Before he knew it, there were gazes focused on him and Diablo. Among them were several high-ranking high-rankers. As expected, the young one speaks much more appropriately. As Diablo's attitude continued to irritate him, someone spoke up after hearing Yuan's words. A green-haired general, the high-ranker, Li Jiangyin, who led the heavenly realm after the Jade Emperor died and disappeared. There is no need to redden your faces even in a place like this. As you know, this is a place where we gather to discuss what lies beyond the world we know. What does that have to do with me right now? Diablo's red eyes glared at Li Jiangyin. Li Jiangyin could read his fiery personality through Diablo's eyes. It was the first time they had met face to face, but it didn't seem like he would back down easily. He reminds me of a certain monkey I know. Li Jiangyin, who muttered while thinking of Sun Ogong, clenched his fists. Soon, he pointed the tip of his unsheathed sword on his back. If you need to fight, this old man is willing to oblige. Even in this place. The fighting spirits of the two clashed. Diablo, who would break but never bend, and Li Jiangyin, who had fought on the battlefields of the heavenly realm his entire life. Even though they looked different, sparks flew when two fiery people collided. At that critical moment, roar, someone else's mana intervened, pushing away the fighting spirits of the two. Shiver, his spine tingled. At the same time, a presence was felt, suppressing the mana and fighting spirit. Diablo and Li Jiangyin's gazes naturally shifted toward the presence. Calm down today. If you just endure a little longer, you'll be able to fight again soon. Yuan spoke and handed Diablo the red cup he had been drinking from. In a situation where even mid-level rankers would have choked and fainted, he looked exceptionally calm. No, not only that. What is this? Diablo squinted his narrowed eyes at Wu Yun, who had calmed him and the Eryongjan army with just his aura. For a moment, he wondered if Cheon Dae Seong had come. Cheon Dae Seong, who turned the heavens upside down and fought monsters outside the tower, was one of the strongest in the tower. In fact, it was the power of Wan Jiamjung that suppressed the magic and mana of the two of them at the same time. That meant, Wan Jiamjung of Wu Yun in front of his eyes had the same power as Qian De Seong. Are you not going to receive it? Diablo looked at the glass of alcohol that Wu Yun was holding out. This was not just a drink to quench one's thirst or boredom. It was like a handshake that meant reconciliation. With his original personality, he would have pushed it away, saying to get lost. If it's alcohol, I won't refuse. Diablo received the glass and drank it in one gulp. The atmosphere calmed down for a moment. The spectators who had been watching the situation with tense faces dispersed. Yongjin Gun also lowered his hand, which had been pointing at Unwoldo. Wu Yun, who had calmed the situation down, reached out to the refreshments served on one side instead of the tasteless alcohol and said. I thought carefully, what the hell happened to you? Diablo's voice lowered. Wu Yun asked a vague question, picked up a sweet chocolate and asked back. What the hell happened for you to suddenly change like this? Diablo saw the essence of Wu Yun, not the outside. And that essence meant strength. Wu Yun's current ranking was 11th. He was already a few steps higher than Diablo, but Diablo didn't think he was weaker than Wu Yun because of that. This was because Diablo had always claimed that the ranking was complete nonsense, and that he could defeat everyone except for a few, including Odin. However, the ranking is complete nonsense. This time, Diablo thought the ranking was nonsense in a different sense. The Wu Yun in front of him right now was just like that. He had broken his and Yongjin Gun's momentum with just one move. How could someone with such skills only be ranked 11th? Since the tower was changing rapidly, it seemed that the ranking would also have to change drastically. Crunch. Wu Yun turned his head as he chewed on the chocolate. There, Heracles was awkwardly reuniting with Zeus. Those two are the same. Those two, the bigger and greater the myth you write, the greater the result. Zeus and Heracles were beings who had written some of the greatest myths in the tower. In particular, the divinity that Heracles had obtained was not smaller than that of Zeus, who had reigned as the king of Olympus for a long time, but rather larger. Wu Yun looked back at Diablo, who was making a puzzled expression as if to ask what he meant, and continued speaking. Your Qianmadaejin won't be short either. It won't be perfect since I'll be finishing it, though. Swish. Yuan got up from his seat. Just as Odin, the main character of this meeting, was starting to heat things up. Yuan's steps were headed in the opposite direction. Where are you going? It's obvious what we'll be talking about. Right, there's nothing more boring than speeches. The real place of importance wasn't this place. There was another meeting held separately, gathering only the top-ranking high rankers and guild leaders, who were at the center of guilds. This place was a kind of show-off meeting where executives of mid-level and higher guilds gathered. There was no need to waste time in a place like this when the real deal was just ahead. Then why did you even come here? Why didn't you just come late like everyone else? I came here to find someone. Did you find them? Yes, as if he didn't have time to talk any longer. Yuan turned his back on Diablo and started walking somewhere. I found them. The castle of Valhalla was packed with people. A green-haired man, who had come outside to catch a breath of fresh air from the stuffy atmosphere, was leaning on the railing, catching the wind. And next to him, thud, someone approached him. Did you follow me? Yuan, who had intentionally made some noise to approach, answered Vishnu's question. I came out here to catch some wind. You're a good liar. They say people who lie often aren't very good at it when people figure it out. No one can fool me anyway. Vishnu took his arms off the railing and turned around to face Yuan. You seem to be a pretty famous ranker, but I don't pay much attention to the world, so I don't know who you are. I hope you understand. I understand. I'm Vishnu. I'm Kim Yuan. The two shook hands. Despite having the same last name, Yuan wasn't surprised. People usually got surprised when they heard the great name of Vishnu. You see my name for what it is. It's not such a great name. You're strangely comfortable, unlike the others. It's as if it's not the first time I've seen you. Yuan wasn't surprised. He thought Vishnu would feel this way. If Mimir was the smartest person Yuan knew, then Vishnu was the most intuitive. His intuition was so good that he even had the ability to control fate with a thin, long thread. This level of intuition wasn't anything to be surprised about. And you seem to have something to tell me. He realized it once again. There were only two people in this tower that he shouldn't lie to. One was Mimir, and the other was Vishnu right in front of him. It was fine. Yuan didn't like to beat around the bush in the first place. I know why you're here. That was why. Yuan got straight to the point. You shouldn't meet.